economy
The feast.
is based on cultivation of uh, product to create a feast, and that happened
For yourself only?
for the surrounding tribe. It developed
For a
when
selfish
Tribe.
purpose.
there's
Lots of
several.
tribes.
There would be
Mhm.
several tribes. This is before civilization. Yeah.
Oh.
So
But
this
that
is
is
1200.
fine.
This is about
Explain something new to
12,000.
me.
It's 12,000 years ago or so. Well, we're talking about where money comes from, so that would be a long time ago.
But
Yeah,
so-
I know that.
The,
where
the,
it
the,
comes
the,
from.
the point is that it's not about the trade, because trade didn't change really. What changed was people did not rely on grain before. The Ice Age created a lot of fields for the first time in humanity to cultivate grain on a large scale. But given to weather and uncertainty and weather and stuff like that, like they didn't use that for food for a long time. What they did start using it for is things like alcohol, mass production of alcohol, because people used to create substances for a long time before that. For the first time, they had cheap access, basically, like get a lot of this shit and you can process it into a lot of. So something that used to be done once in a while,
Like the
was now available.
shamans of the tribe would have alcohol or like mushrooms.
Yeah, like it takes time to
And
make that
nobody
shit.
else did.
Well, it takes time to make that
He's the
shit,
only one.
and if you don't have a lot of grain, for example, you can't really make a lot of that stuff, right? So this is the first time we can make a lot of drugs. So the first things that are cultivated are not for food; they're cultivated for booze. So you have your wheat, you have your barley, you have your
Water.
you have weed, you have tobacco, you have everything that you can grow in a field now
Mhm.
starts to become more drug production more intensely. People are still hunting most of the time because they're moving with the weather. They don't trust droughts. They don't trust, like you wouldn't drop everything just because you have this. Like nothing, it doesn't change that fast. Like that's not realistic. Time goes on, and you have now these people are using those fields for this, those people are using the fields for that, blah blah blah. Somebody is in control of this field because they're generous, they're allowing people to do the work for the feast. So every year there's a feast, so there's work needs to be done, everything is friendly, blah blah blah. Normal
It's like
changes.
in the game, what you're talking to
Normal
me right
changes.
Now. Whatever you're saying right now, it sounds like in the games that they used to play. In the real life.
I'm repeating some research here. I just probably am not very.
Games was made in the research as well.
I'm trying to reiterate a paper that I read.
The idea is there's a move from the tribe, as we would think, like everybody's family. You're all tribe. If somebody doesn't want to work or whatever, it's like you're one. You're one.
Well, yeah,
family
like
kind
you
of thing,
can't
right?
not want to work forever because first you'll get bored.
Right, that's
Second,
all-
it's not
What
in,
else you gonna do to survive?
exactly. So there's no lazy people
Yeah.
involved.
Right.
No.
It would be very rare for extended.
Throw the users of the cliff.
There's that,
There-
but that,
but
that
that
comes
comes
later.
later.
Fuck
That comes
me.
later. So this is talking
When you
about
don't do your job that you're
this
told to do.
this division of what this grain, this access to the feast, the grain, the alcohol, the drugs, access to the drugs. It caused a sort of, let's say, division,
A demand as well.
a division, a split in society where everybody's all one family. That thing became fractured.
Where
So
you
now
have the
you've-
owners,
now
of the
you've got-
owners of the grain and the workers of the grain, and you start to see the first different
At the
sectioning off.
very point
So
where
the man holding the beer can in his hand.
Well, that's again.
That's what
if
we're
they-
here
if-
for.
if- yeah, no, we've already said this
We're
many
not-
many
we're not
times.
hypocrites. We're not
Yeah, we
hypocrites.
definitely know
Modern
that.
days, things are different. What can you do?
Well, that's kind of the big question, right? How do
There's no
you
questions.
how do you turn what we have today to at least reflect a part of what we had before? Not in terms of the stuff, because we can't go back. Obviously, it's not realistic. But in terms of understanding what the fuck we're doing, there is still a chance to at least have
now
a more appropriate look,
here's an
outlook
interesting
for it,
part of my
which
research.
would drive what you do. again.
Interesting part of my research here is that you can't escape capitalism, quote unquote, this way that we relate to each other in valuing things and using a market system. That it doesn't go away. We're here now. That never stops. There's no going back to.
So it's not
central government gives you everything and plans it all. Capitalism has won, and this is kind of like a lot of authors, contemporary authors, that say the same thing. Try to make the same argument. You can't go around. You can't escape it.
Well, it
has to be.
Well, it reemerges. It always reemerges. Like say Russians.
It's a chapter of evolution.
Say the
Revolution.
Russian Revolution.
It's a chapter of evolution.
Let's say the Russian Revolution. The longer they pushed back.
I don't believe in it, man. It's
But
damn
the
Europeans tried to destroy Russia back then.
But you can see it in then like the writing of everything that had happened as well. Not just what people say, but like there was a huge resistance to the point where it couldn't resist anymore, and it still turned into another version. China again, push back. Still, it like because too many people, too many of the same interest. When the class on the top starts to grow, it starts to divide into columns. Right, like you can't have a big mountain peak. It starts to break. You need more shit to support you from underneath. Leaders, more followers, right? Less leaders, more followers. But the more leaders you have, right, the more they need management. And it starts to split again to reduce the number of people on top. It always talks. All revolutions really are about reductions of the people on top, the number of them specifically, because it becomes unmanageable. It's like too much weight on top, not enough to support it from the bottom. So that's the pattern.
The old revolutions is slightly different.
Too much weight on top.
Especially
That sounds weird.
based on other people involved in the situation of the
And the shit slinging turbine is not. We have another picture of like how society really works, and it's like a really fast turning turbine. It sucks up fuel from the bottom, but under normal circumstances, it's supposed to use the fuel and return it back in a controlled fashion, so everything is stable. The one that we're talking about spins so fast it just flings shit everywhere, and we call it the shit pile.
where the
Shitstorm.
shit comes from.
Us.
Shithawk shitstorm.
Production.
We're not flying.
Well, if you take a look at a landfill, right? If you ever seen a landfill? You've seen a landfill, right?
Modern days, they freaking clean them.
Most of the things that are there,
in your garage sometimes.
most things in
True.
a landfill were produced about 6 months before they got there.
What can you do?
Maybe not that. Maybe,
Well, how do
maybe
you not do
that?
Wait, Kenya, what's your bigger picture here? What are you even
The
talking
bigger
about?
picture there is like you can't do it for profit. That's
Oh.
like, let's say, the ultimate.
Yeah, and
limiter.
okay, so let me, if I may, please, this discussion of the tribe, gaining access to fields, to wheat grain, creating all kinds of alcohol, having control over this, that kind of switch that happens in culture when it's like, okay, boom, wait
We
a
have a
minute,
product.
I need to control actually this land, so that's a commodification of land. I need to control it, I need warriors to guard it, and now I'm going to take in favors from all the tribes around me and so that they can have alcohol too, right? And feast. This is the beginning of capitalism.
Yeah, drugs.
This is that
Good
thing.
old drugs.
Hold on. This is that thing that you're talking about. China. Oh, China went, the big boom, and then now it's capitalism again.
Mhm.
Whatever country does this big boom, and now it's capitalism. It's all capitalism now. It started in the very fucking beginning. So this is the key point to take away, is that when that tribe turned to the dark side, let's say, call it,
Of capitalism.
that was an uptake of capitalism back then. In this primitive culture, they had capitalism already.
Well,
That is
it's the
to
most
take-
ancient and the most modern manifestation
that
of
is
social structures.
utilizing this ego with its reward punishment structure, right? I'm going to get rewards in the future. I'm going to get so many rewards. All these tribes are going to love me, right? That's what it is. And what the ego does is look at land, look at each other as capital. You're capital. You're my slave now. You're the slave, right? Capital.
Worker.
The ego has this capital vision. That was there right in the very beginning. That's where it took off.
Yeah.
So that's the alpha. That's how we know the omega, because we know how it started. That's how it has to come back to that. And yeah, capitalism and people railing on capitalism and all this shit, they're talking about the core of what it's always been. It's not capitalism isn't some new thing after the Industrial Revolution, then we invented capitalism. No. It was capitalism you could call the very first thing that ever separated a tribe against another tribe.
Yeah.
Or a tribe against itself.
It's
capitalism.
Really.
That's what it is. It's at the core.
Well, yes.
This is what we have to know. That's where we have to proceed from.
But we can't say fuck capitalism. Because capitalism will kill you.
Well, now you have these things like, and I think this is related to libido, and jouissance. Okay. Jouissance, libido.
Are those names or is that a word?
These are terms used by Lacan.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't read the book yet.
So the plateaus of commodification have built into, as we've offloaded, as we call culture, outwards. It's built in through the ego. This what I think libido, like I think that's a distinction from desire itself. Libido is as having this object, the object of desire, built into what we call libido, and it's based in these plateaus of commodification that have been built up.
I'm not sure we need a distinction then. What for?
To say that these are like...
No, between like desire and libido. Like
desire as a generic...
Desire is already...
And I may be out on a limb here.
So no,
but I'm trying to
here's
interpret.
what I'm saying. Desire is already part of the affective process in which it places self into narratives, right?
Right.
So you already have an object of desire. Like by our own sort of definitions, if you will, we already got there. So we don't necessarily need a new word or anything.
Right. So the distinction here is desire is not anchored to any specific object. This is the desiring production. This is the more generic, like the creative force of life.
Okay, separate desire from narrative somehow. Like, how can you do that?
It's like the story that tells itself.
You're right, but it's self-referential. It still has a subject. It still has an object. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah,
it's already...
I mean, isn't this like the charlatan's problem of overcoming? That everything is. Like,
well, you could
expression?
you could say we could have a distinction if the object is itself foreign. Because otherwise, you always have an object of self-reference.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if it's foreign, then we're talking systemic implantation, so to speak.
So okay, let me give context for this then quickly. And I didn't bring the book here, but whatever. Lyotard rails on how people love their bondage in capitalism. They just love to eat the shit of capital.
So sadomasochism, yes.
Because it's built into the structure.
I never say it right. Sadomasochism. There you go.
Sure.
Sadomasochism.
Mm-hmm.
That's
the default.
Freedom.
That's the default understanding of freedom. Yeah.
It's a feeling of psychiatrist.
No. It's the default. It's the unspoken truth of sort of being marketable good in the system of capital. So choose yourself.
So, like, I'm a bit sketchy on this whole jouissance and libido, and there's maybe one other word for it.
I'm going to tell you right now, I don't like the word libido. Mainly because of its connotation.
Sexual?
Yeah. It's a little bit too far that route. Like I can get like the concept of hankering for something uncontrollably, but that's basically a neurosis, right? Like I think
People say healthy libido, a healthy sex drive, right? So that mixes that up.
yeah, that's why I don't like it.
Um,
We have different sex discussions.
right. Okay. But yet, this book is trying to pick out the fact that our desire, in its being bent towards ego from self, is that's considered a suppression of true desire.
Wait, if it's being bent towards self, it is being bent towards ego. Because ego is given a permanence to an ephemeral, um,
Yeah.
emergent quality, right?
Through reward and punishment.
In the attempt to
Pardon?
quantify it by, say, your social security number, for example, but to capture that reappearing self, or that disappears all the time, and create something solid out of it.
Question from audience.
Yeah.
What's the website number?
Which
The
website?
name, the YouTube channel.
YouTube, Paper Sheepdog. You gonna be a viewer? Make us famous, Igor. Yeah. So the point of that was, why do the workers? Why does the working class like to be whipped? Okay, that's the question. The answer is
While saying it does not.
fine.
No,
The
no,
an-
it's
because-
important to mention that,
because they
actually.
keep doing it. So obviously, and the answer is about relation to the commodification process, commodification of life, in its various plateaus that are being created. At each plateau, even the first one, you already have this effect happening where you have the desire, but it's also supplanted by a higher desire, quote unquote, which the ego constructs, and you are part of that society.
So
you,
substitution.
you automatically, quote unquote, desire it
Mm-hmm. So
because you desire to live.
yeah, in 33 Myths of the System, where with that.
So
he
that's
was-
what
he
I
was-
got out of jouissance and
he was-
libido.
He was talking about how shit, kind of lost my train of thought there.
33 myths.
Yeah. So can you repeat that last little bit?
Just the desire for the commodified life. Desire for things that have been forced on you by society as a plateau because you're part of it. That
Right.
It's like a side desire.
So what he mentioned was how the notion of survival, right, is being replaced by consumption. So the biggest gimmick in the market essentially is to equate product with survival and living. So if you have product, you're set for this many minutes of life, so to speak. If you have product Y, you're set for more minutes of life, and so on and so goes. So the biggest kind of like this commercial, if you will, that's running behind the scenes is is this equation of product and some more of extension, like you extended your right to live, if you will, a little bit further. There's a movie about that that captures the notion really well of this, when they have minutes ticking on their wrists, and if it goes down to 0, you die. So you work for your minutes.
Oh damn.
And the rich people basically accumulate like thousands and thousands of years of life, while the poor have to like make it day by day without dying.
Isn't that it?
Shit movie, but same idea.
Right. Yeah, so that was the distinction. So this is what I got from this is the root of the book. It starts with desire. It makes a claim that there is a desire outside of ego, basically, that there is a natural desire, a self fulfilling desire.
So what I would normally refer to as like being restless, bored. If you're not really doing anything, you kind of have the energy to. You do
Sure,
want to
fine.
expand it. You want to.
You could feel that. I
Well,
think.
you
Why not?
build up and dissipation. Build up and dissipation is still a factor, right? So
Yeah.
thinking about that, and you know, like there's already an established relation through which to interact with. It would definitely have a drive for
Great.
participation.
So
rather
that's
than
it.
not.
These this is how I interpreted the book. Is that it's all about desire to begin with. That's the philosophical starting point for this. Is that people there and saying there is a natural desire, but there's also this ego desire, which creates the market, which creates capitalism, and it's a separate desire. Right.
Well,
From the natural.
it's when
quote,
you
unquote.
it's when you have commodification, literally, which is essentially substitution through quantity. So if
Yes,
if this costs X amount of
which
money,
only-
and this is the quote unquote same thing, costs less amount of money, it's like you can replace.
Which only the ego could be interested in, because only the ego is interested in
Which is
black and white exchanges for reward and punishment.
Sure.
That's the only thing that can respond to that. That's
And
why
the other thing
this
is-
is the great branch off.
And the other thing is that you can actually notice this in action, like just by observing what's happening in any store, is when you have same price, smaller packages, or you know, like just the different variations on the theme of just replacing calling it the same thing, but making it something else, like putting wood chips inside your bread, putting Subway.
Laundering.
That's right, paper.
Laundry.
Toilet paper and the sausages. That's
No
why you
doubt.
didn't have toilet paper in Soviet Union. Everything went for the sausages.
Or vodka made of shit.
Or
and
when
wood
or
chips.
when you can read yesterday's Soviet news on your bread.
Mix the cognac with the tea. Same color. Now we're going for music break.
Mmm.
Spread, go.
Music break. Music break. It does. We'll get monetized. I mean, we'll get unmonetized. And with that, we'll take a be right back break.
Ладно, я думаю, что вы знаете же композицию «Дорожная», да? Ее, мне кажется, нужно спеть обязательно, потому что жизнь — это дорога, да? И вот эта поездка метафизическая в никуда в этой песне, мне кажется, очень сильно, очень точно выражена. Александр Адольфович Пуза, композиция «Дорожная». Встречайте, дамы и господа. Здрасте! Я куплю себе змею или черепаху, а тебя я не люблю. Ехай, ехай нахуй, ехай нахуй, ехай нахуй, ехай нахуй, навсегда. Лучше отсидеть на зоне можно и 15.
Round
Я
two.
с тобою в Армазоне. Ехай, ехай нахуй.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen.
I timed that well.
For round two. Perfect timing.
Hey, do you like your brain pills?
Yeah, it's over there.
It's about 10, 15 seconds.
Those
delay
guys?
on the line.
Mhm.
On the line.
10-15 seconds, that's typical. Yep.
What do you think?
It's a brain pill.
Brain pill.
Look at beer it is.
Take half.
Yep, I
Just
know.
half.
I know.
Give me half.
Yeah. Where is? Where's-
Supplements for a peak thinking performance.
If you
duties.
think I talk a lot now,
Okay.
Dude, just grab it and break it.
that's what I'm doing.
Oh, okay. Well, that's gonna be very difficult. Yeah,
It's not like I'm a pro at this.
it's not that. Just don't be so the wimp.
You hand workers, whatever, manual laborers,
Look at the perfection here.
Did it?
blue colors.
Handmade. Good James. Have fun.
Well, thanks for the intermission music.
Hope you had the rest. You got some rest.
Oh yeah.
Enjoy.
Oh,
Save the
yeah.
world.
Mm-hmm.
From capitalism.
From
Everything
capitalism.
we can.
It's coming. It's coming. Igor's invested 5%.
It's not for profit though.
I know. Yeah, I know. Round 3.
Mm. Mm.
Back up.
Close the windows when you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Always.
For sure.
And doors in the office.
I'll leave.
Close them too.
I'll leave
For
these on
AC?
your desk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need them. Well, I can actually stand not smoking.
Yep. Well, so welcome to live stream number 46. This is book stream number 16, I believe. And
The top of my head is looking great.
well, it is looking beautiful. And so we're only actually half hour into this session, but we've only got, so it's like a half sesh, let's call it. But we've been just chatting, hanging out, talking, philanthropizing,
With my old man.
pardon, having our
This is all-
casual meeting, so
yeah.
thanks for bearing with us.
It's a family business, as you can see.
Hmm
It's not.
Yeah,
Alright.
so what to do today? You asked very, you mentioned very presumptuously, are we done the book now?
The arc, the trajectory of the actual
Right.
exposition, not
Right.
not the substance.
So we do have,
Presumptuously, as if we're not at the very tail end.
yeah, that's how I see it. Definitely. There is the work that we've been working on right now with about the introduction should lead back to the end of it. So in other words, what's being introduced is a promise, if you will, that the end.
Just like with any communicate, right? Like as long, whenever you send out a signal on a wire, it has a kind of a call
Right.
to action sort of.
So
element to
we've
it.
done a ton of work with this book already. And I guess I'll kind of like maybe set up things a bit more normal. But we've done a ton of work with the book. The whole like content is fairly set. What isn't fairly set is the very ending, let's say, the final section, right? And I want to use this introduction, this book report, quote unquote, as an introduction to connect in and say, what promises does the contemporary philosopher wish that we would make? Those are the promises that we will make in the start, and we will deliver them in the end. Just to be presumptuous on that. So it's a high sort of goal, but I want to frame this book as in contemporary thought, what contemporary thought thinks about the current situation of civilization, capitalism, the counterculture response, and all this kind of stuff. I want the book to sit right in there. And the only way I know how to do that is through thanks to this book, Mark Fisher, for laying it out, because he's contemporary, right on the edge. He's into all that kind of like leftist theory and feminism, all this kind of stuff, which I think we need as far as like horizontalism and all that.
Now, when you say leftist, and we need, now that's triggering.
Yeah,
I would say.
Statement. I don't identify
because
personally.
The problem would be is we're not
as any kind of political.
We're not necessarily politically speaking on either left or right.
Right.
Nor is the middle is an option either.
And so I just don't know what author kind of puts this all on the plate for the right.
They don't.
So I don't know what to do about that. But I do know that our work appeals directly to the sensibilities of the right and the left.
Hold on, I might have been premature in saying that. I just can't picture anybody who had anything to say that didn't wind up diving off a cliff into a sewer.
Right.
So
the typical.
So that's the real issue with that. I don't believe that they don't exist per se. It's just that whatever is coming out to the mainstream is absolute garbage.
I get it. Now I'm wearing a certain hat which would suggest
Jesus.
that I may know a thing or two about kind of like some at least fundamentalist kind of right-wing side of things, of like, you know, like the Constitution.
Just being an ass about it. That's my thoughts.
That's the usual take, isn't it?
Well, I mean,
right?
No, I don't think the way I take you to be an ass is
so like
resonates with people, let's say Geiger or whatever.
I know my rights.
Like, he would take that to be an absolute signal.
I like it for the trigger factor, but I mean, in retrospect, it can quote unquote damage your ability to.
It damages the medium.
Communicate with people.
Right. It damages the ability. So, and here's really the trick. We have a situation in which our media channels are already very, very constricted, exclusive, in other words. And then
yes.
And then what this does is it makes it even more impossible to actually hold a straightforward communication through the limitations of the media, so through the scarcity. So what this really means is that you have a very scarce capacity for actual communication, and only passable styles of it remain unfiltered. And censorship, in other words.
Right. Yeah.
Just a more subtle one.
This is the typical media bubble trope. Being stuck in your own bubble. Exclusivity of foreign narratives. Basically, they can't be allowed in, or the whole fucking thing explodes. And what does that tell you about your little world? Anyways, they're both sides are like that. They would be destroyed.
Well, what we can do is we can paint the picture that in both cases there's a minefield to be navigated. And if you blow up a mine, all these communication channels, you could say, disappear. Sure. And that could be by a repetition of whatever meme, right, despite its context.
I mean, we don't need to get into that, but I'm not really afraid of any kind of... Like, I just think we need to be beyond that. You know, like, talk to me in conversation, find out who I am, all that kind of stuff. You know,
yeah, I tried that.
Whatever
It doesn't
else.
really work well because I don't listen.
But then, so you're either pandering to one side and alienating another side, or you're pandering to the other and
So,
alienating
yeah.
another. So it all just doesn't fucking matter.
On a personal note, you know what helped me? Like, how do I think about it in a certain way? I think I made a Facebook status post about this. Is basically I said, everybody only ever hears themselves, and don't mean that in the selfish sense, but I'm saying like when you hear anything whatsoever, there is that part that hits your ears, right? There's also that part that transforms what you're hearing into a sequence of images or whatever the story
Sure.
might be.
Of
That
course.
part is self-generated, and it's an inescapable truth, sort of reality, I guess you could say, truthism, uh, that is experientially valid for, well, everyone. Because unless you are not a neural network
Truthism.
processing that information, we might not have enough in common to hold this discussion. Just.
Did you have? Oh yeah.
Mhm.
One of them
Mhm.
things. So we can get to that.
So yeah, it's like it's a minefield,
I know.
and the problem, of course, is that the elements of the field are entirely foreign for navigation. They're not self-supplied by experience. They're supplied by the market
Mhm.
and placed by.
And you just get punished, and then it's up to you to figure out why the fuck did I just get punished.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Typical. Wow. Last one.
Oh look, I'm bobbing my head still.
Don't do
Whoops.
that. Don't do that. Don't.
Yeah.
Oh no
buddy.
no. Yep. So we got half a session going on. We've talked a lot today about, I guess, the original tribe, capitalism, how that splintered off, if you will, and in other words, the alpha to the omega, which we are finding. Like, can we talk big picture here? Because I got the fucking big picture laid right out. Boom. That's it. This is the big picture. Is
Are you
that
going to paint it, or are you just going to say it exists?
it exists. It exists.
All right. Well, I don't know if we need to actually focus on details for the session.
I
Thought.
bet we can get somewhere good.
What I thought is the fact that we have all of the medicine machine figured out last time,
Right.
and we're basically tiptoeing around Sentient's machine, and it's
Right.
really a two-component overlay on the ontological matrix that brings about the isomorphism with the pre-plateau tribal sort of state, and I think it also sort of answers your question here. If you could only repeat it for me, because I just lost track of it.
Well, I guess just coming back around to the initial question of what's all gone wrong. This desire for capitalism.
So yeah. You were talking about
The alpha.
how capitalism is at the beginning of it and how it's also at the end of the whole picture.
Right.
And interestingly enough, what I'm just repeated is how can we bring about an isomorphism from the beginning into the current picture? So literally sort of bringing back what was sort of effectively lost, if you will, in the process, or got muddied up in the process.
Right, and that's the whole point of the chronology chapter is so far is we have to get this picture painted of what is it even like, what was it like, and there's a lot of mentions of post-capitalism.
So I do
In
have
this book, too.
suggestions, if you will, to drive this discussion itself. We've established that there's a medicine machine. If you want to discuss any details of hows and whatnot, but look, let's assume we have that quote unquote working. What does Sentient's machine looks like, or Sentient machine, And with that, I think I can actually cover a lot of ground, or sorry, we can cover a lot of ground through agile economics as one prong, like point.
Okay.
And secondary to that,
I can see you're formulating.
the three computational, the computational model that we have sitting at the top of the guild stack. So
Right.
agile economic brain is for demonstrating the isomorphism between the pre-plateau and the post-plateau. Right? Like that's agile economic is supposed to express how to adapt the isomorphism from the pre-civilized tribes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Who could go out into nature and grab their rope and grab their, fire sticks and all of that stuff, and their axe heads and anything they basically needed from persistent
The abundance of
the-
nature.
Yeah, the persistent cooperation of the tribe itself. How does that look like in post-plateau? Well, the agile economics model is supposed to give a picture of how that works isomorphically in a commodified
In a
scenario.
like modern environment,
Exactly.
if you will.
So
Right.
so that's
That's the link we need to make, sure, yeah. And we need to show exactly what it's looking like
and then
in a
to-
modern day.
and then to ensure so part of these sanctions, if you will, is that it's a repetition of the already natural sentient process, and that's more like a passive sentience. But more active and more deliberate one would be the computation, which deals with linguistics and domains. On top of that, it deals with the structure of the complex adaptive system, and computation based on reliance of complex adaptability, essentially, and that imbued with all of the representation of agile economics and its own self-computation. So the self-referential part on its own, with the inclusion of in the polyglottic sense, do you know what I mean? A polyglottic Klein kind of deal, where you have one language saying two things in different languages.
Mhm.
So that kind of thing incorporated into the main computational model of the sentient machine. You have your agile economics and the references to the all the layers.
Right.
That are
This
stacked
allows you to
below
connect
that.
connect other nodes.
Right back down to the root. So if you hover from the top, you just inject the agile economics through the entire bottom layers, and then isomorphism
Yeah.
is built on these.
And isn't this
on the
interesting
on the whole
how
thing.
in the core of this sentient machine is this ability to understand that other people will have other models and other labels in use in their domain, and it will mean the exact same thing as for you in your domain.
With a
Right.
different label and a different construct,
Right.
or
So to
or
be open to
one
that,
to one, like there's going to be different ways to actually bind conceptuality depending on which domains are being brought together and how they're contextualized together.
right. And so this is kind of like a problem that is always there, always existing, but if you ignore it, it doesn't go away.
Just before I forget, that small, tiny dynamic I just mentioned is actually at the core of what guild dynamics is trying to express as to how these kinds of structures would bind together as a social unit through going through time, appearing and disappearing.
Right. And even the idea of having a database for your guild, sort of shared database, towards a shared structure and nomenclature and all that.
Well, think about domains. Every time you have a new domain, you basically have at least an association guild, or
Yeah.
or any of the deeper ones, which could be a loop back. Every guild is an association guild. It's just that a few of them have more criteria involved, right? Like biological connection or geological connection.
Hmm.
So what I'm saying is basically whenever that entire idea of having separate domains is actually a fundamental element of the process of guild dynamics, sitting above the natural guild dynamics themselves. So it's how you get the phenome from the DNA, from the genome. Phenome genome kind of discrepancy. I'm trying to link the two up and saying when you start to get to this ancient guild stuff and agile economics, guild dynamics is now the structure
Right.
that describes what happens in those
Okay.
interactions.
So just a quick, I guess, comment. This is all so far like theoretical structure. So we're not necessarily talking about instantiation. And this is kind of like what I want to
It's a mental
almost
kind of thing.
straddle with the book is like instantiation, but no, you can't really.
But in the mental sense, yeah,
can't really do
hyperstitional.
it with a book. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So I want to get into like the structure. Like I want it to exist in the book and then be lifted out and utilized.
Chaos coming into order, or order coming into chaos. Take your pick.
You want ram with me? Indeed, indeed.
So yeah, like why don't we just jump to those two topics and discuss what agile economics really is and how it relates to the idea of the tribe that we discussed previous session.
Okay. But before we do
how
that,
it builds the isomorphism in the
Wait.
passive sense.
okay, say
Go
it
ahead.
again.
So
What do you propose we go into?
So we usually have plateaus of commodification layered this way.
Sure.
Just imagine them sideways. We have a pre,
Okay.
we have a post. Between them, we have the 4 plateaus of commodification, right? What we're trying to do is to find the isomorphism between the pre and the post. Pre and post refers to pre-plateau and post-plateau,
Yeah.
with post being
So
going through the entire stack of commodification.
Right. And what would it look like? What would that environment look like?
So last time we covered the
Second.
pre with the idea of you build your chisel, you build your axe head, you build your axe handle, like all of these like neat, necessary skills that come from the abundance of the environment, and just trying to make the link between having a tribe, a fully skilled tribe in that scenario interacting to show that picture, and then to flip it upside down again to our modern time and look at it from the perspective of we have an economic system, we have an industry, we have the entire shebang of commodification. So clearly we can't go out into the forest and grind an axe and make that useful for anybody. That's not the solution.
Right. Yes. Okay, so I agree that as a broad way of describing what we need out, what this last final section of the book needs to bring forth is this connection of the pre-commodification tribe into the modern environment. So we're sheltering the guild, in other words.
So pre-capital, what does pre-capital looks like unified with post-capital?
Right.
From the perspective of leaving it to capital is, what do you call it? A train wreck
Yep.
in the making.
Right. Okay, so that I agree. Definitely, that's the big arc that the book needs to kind of come back to this tribal culture and revisit it after all of this. Okay, this is what's happened now. You know, like the plateaus of commodification. Where do we go from here to bring back what some of the things that were not the things that were there, but not to bring back the past, but to shelter a different way of relating to each other.
With simply the fundamental understanding that the nature of the human being itself had not changed,
Hasn't changed, right?
but is placed into a different
Sure,
context.
that's important. And there's so much railing in this book. There's like, they picked like 4 different authors saying like, you can't go back, you can't, there's no outside of capital, you can't go back, there's no outside. I think what they're talking about is like whole systemically, you don't just change the whole system, right?
Well, you can't because of how it's
The plateaus
because
are
of how
formed.
the response from the system makes that an unrealistic.
So, and this is back to the, I won't call it the L word.
Love.
No. What else did they call it?
What is an L word?
L word. And
Oh.
even worse, jouissance, some French-asked word. But what I got from that was like this desire bound into the plateau. You are part of the plateau, therefore, via ego, you've been bound into the plateau.
I think to bring the matter home very, very clearly, we need to look at a plateau as a medium. When you look at it as a medium, the medium is where you bottom out what you can communicate through. Right? You can't go past your
Sure.
medium. So you can't
Yeah.
go past sound waves,
Yeah.
for example,
Exactly.
to do speech.
Yet some people do go into below these commodities, can take skills up.
No. What I'm saying is that the isomorphism that we're looking at has to be constrained, fundamentally constrained to the plateau. When people are saying, we can't go back, we can't go back, we can't go back, I'm trying to make this a more specific reason for what's not coming back. And that is that each plateau creates a medium of communication,
Right.
and each successive plateau subsumes it. So because it's all subsumed that way, the bits and pieces you get of the remaining medium
And
limits A, how it's channeled, and B, what is available for the protocol.
it's like flocking. Everybody goes to one.
And so
Way
with that in
mindset,
mind, with this kind of cruft buildup, how do you find self-same signalic isomorphisms between those two communication layers? Because if you reduce them back down to the fact that they're mediums, right? It's with the medium where you can find the similarities in how you're utilizing it. If the medium in the past has been utilized in a certain way,
You
you
can
can
always
take that
break.
pattern, substitute for whatever is the correct.
But you can always break down the medium though into its constituents, if you're speaking at the lower, the fundamental layers fundamental to the medium.
No. You don't have to necessarily bottom out into the next layer, because each layer is an emergence. So whenever you have
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
whenever what I mean
Then
is that
speak at the lower layer.
what I mean is that you need to reify a signal in your layer as an expression in the other layer in terms of your layer. So you are still bottoming out at your layer, and the only real reason to do it is by representation, or the real method to do it is by representation. So that means isomorphic upload and download. So you're saying, oh, there's a signal here.
You're assuming a lot by saying your layer, quote unquote.
I'm talking about commodification layers.
Yeah.
Each one is a language.
What I'm saying
Each
is you
one
can
is a
learn
language
lower.
built on
You
top of
can
the
learn
other.
lower languages.
Well, you can, but the only way to do it is from the upper language is to find representations of the of these
Right.
signals and symbols
That's the way you
involved
do it,
in the.
typically.
So it's
That
not.
would be the fast
it's
way.
indirect.
You don't have to do it that
My
way.
point. You can't do it any other way.
You can.
Not about what I'm speaking. So maybe we're talking about two different things.
I'm just thinking like layers of commodification. Let's say you dropped in the
Programming.
middle of the forest or something, and you learn how to make a fire by
Programming.
yourself or something.
Let's start with programming. In a programming language, you bootstrap the
Okay.
meaning of things
Look,
in the way they're used.
you've got
by the
civilization.
lower
You're
things.
describing civilization here. Let's say you drop a tribe, boom, middle of nowhere. Now they're learning all over again.
Listen.
That lower languages
Let me
more
finish. Let me
fundamental.
finish the thought. Let me finish the thought. You're programming in JavaScript, okay? You have integers, okay? That's part of the lower stratum of everything. You're building a program, which is your chunking off all of these different low-level patterns into specific units that are self-contained, right? So you've done all of that. The program speaks in these chunks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because the program speaks in these chunks, it does not actually know what that integer is. Instead, what you have to do is create a representation in one of your chunks
Yeah, I
of
know.
programming
No, I get it. I got that.
to represent that
Yeah,
integer.
that's fine.
And moreover, you're stuck only talking to the chunk. You cannot use the direct integer. You have to you have to involve the thing that represents it in your domain. So what I'm saying is that it doesn't bottom out past that. And it's fine as long as the isomorphisms, aka you build up more and more appropriate chunks to represent those primitives that you have below. If you get that done isomorphically, cool. You're doing
Okay,
it. But the problem
so-
is that you're not touching that layer.
This is
So it's arbitrary and can be commodified to shit.
This seems to be pointing at the, like, I guess, genericness of plateaus.
Yes.
In how it doesn't matter how you learn it, it's going to be the same chunks you end up assorting.
Yeah. All I'm saying here is that we're at least 4 different chunks removed. So we got like the chaotic to ordered.
Right. Okay. So we're not arguing. We're just having
ratio.
an annoying talk.
It's an entropy thing.
Talk over fest.
It's an entropy thing. There's just so much more fuckery at the top layer that to represent the bottom layer properly, it takes an enormous effort.
But it doesn't mean that you can't just start from nothing and start making chunks of the bottom plateau.
Thankfully, we are human beings, and therefore we're pre-bootstrapped into the living conditions that kind of cover that ground already. We're not born into a vacuum, and our discussion should not start from a vacuum.
But it's the same thing that keeps happening over and over again.
Well, in ontological
Same
terms,
type of ego chunking.
it's like with the preppers and the people that why is it also off-putting to do all of the nature stuff. If you go out there in the forest by yourself trying to do all of this stuff,
dead.
you'll starve before you finish your axe or something. That's
You
just
dead.
that's just the reality of it. So yeah, it's definitely
So I'm kind of wondering here, like I
it's a
get,
heuristic.
I like your point to connect the pre and the post, right? The
Well, I mean, that is the
isomorphism
point.
between the pre
Because
and the
you're
post
looking at the alpha and the
modification.
omega for capitalism. This is the connections. These are the connection points. Because on the first end it's the
Right.
split. On the other end
And
it's the
so,
connection
yes,
back.
the split, desire, and I have it as for self, for ego here. And I mean, the thing about subordinated group consciousness through to accelerationism, through to reification and medicine, through to a generic question, is post-capitalism imaginable? This
Mhm.
gives the reader a story of, like an introductory story of the current thought
Zeitgeist,
thought
yeah.
in the matter of the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah.
So that it needs to be in here. What is the pre that we are moving to the post. It's got to be in here. This is where all the current contemporary authors are all talking about this shit.
So my suggestion
right
is, why don't we juxtapose their work or the meat of their work with that tribe I described at the beginning, to give the picture of the split and the connection point back, so that we can kind of
Yeah. Well, that's the
like
idea,
that, like
I think.
so kind of like when we describe the alpha, we can start about the split. When we talk about the omega, we can start about where the connection back. And with that, I need to be right back.
Good timing. Two prongs. It's a very good plan. Very good plan. So yes, of course, we are only 1 hour in. We got about another hour and a half, 2 hour maybe, something like that. Anyways, it's all good. Lots of good debates, and I like the big picture types of thinking and talking. You know, the big picture stuff.
Well, you are pragmatic, aren't you?
Yeah, so I don't want to walk away from this meeting thinking, damn, another meeting, and we didn't talk about shit.
If we cover agile economics and domains,
We've covered it all over and over and over again.
but that's the end of the book.
Yes, but the alpha must match the omega. So we have
Well, I'm
to...
trying to get there with the isomorphism with the pre.
I get it. Yes, and that's our essentially. That's our. I think we talked about that the last few weeks. We've been discussing this. That we'll take the original tribe described in chronology, in the first section of the
I
book,
think that only came out last time.
and want to
Like
probably
as strongly as
strongly.
it did anyway.
And
Anyway, I'm
really
sorry.
bring that home. Bring it home.
Yeah.
That's the idea. It's the original tribe. We're kind of all.
That we're not asking you to be.
We're getting these feelings like of empathy, of like empathize with this tribe, and like, you know, it could just be your friends and homies and all that.
Well, if you look at the way it's structured, right? Like if everybody knows everything else, what everybody else knows, and everybody can do whatever everybody can else do,
Education is important.
then whatever they're doing is the same thing that you'd be doing if given a different moment.
So
right? So empathy is
I
built
totally
in.
get it, and basically this type of society is what needs to fill every niche of society. In other words,
Ubiquitously,
in other words, the guild needs to be sheltered and protected everywhere, and just pop up and appear everywhere, right? That's the strength of it, right? So we've got all these little visions and flashes, but how do we connect this in to contemporary philosophy? How do we connect it with what people are doing now, with what people are thinking about? That's where I've done this entire cataloging of this book, because it's a perfect introduction
of that sentiment, yeah.
and there's a lot of things I let's say I don't ask too much, but I think often in this way, but maybe I should just give the report, just go through the pages and say da 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 da, this is where the counterculture is right now. Let's say.
Well, that's a product.
It is a product. It's kind of a big thing.
It depends on who you're selling it to, right?
Right. And the idea is to kind of make it as broadly appealing as possible. And or is it?
I think the idea there would be to prove our
contemporary thought is there.
To prove our capacity to people that don't necessarily deserve to be proved anything.
Fine. No, I get it.
So
I totally get it.
You can see my lack of inclination.
So I want to just, we've got a couple hours.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just right now, if we can, let's even just chill. Let's call it a chill session, hang out for half an hour. Let's call it,
all right.
20 minutes, half hour.
Do you mind if I ramble at some point?
Where you can ramble, but I would like the focus of the next half hour to be this book report that I produced of this fucking amazing book, which introduces our work perfectly to the T.
My problem is that I can't speak to it.
I
lack the book's knowledge. I don't have it, right? So my problem is that I can only
in conversation. I
can only relate it back to model speaking and all of that, and what we're actually doing.
Right. So you'll find yourself feeling lost and don't know what to say about this or that particular. But
or trying to argue terms.
Which
happens a lot.
it does, yes, and that's productive. That's fine. That's productive.
Well, the main reason is because we have a very elaborate model to say things. So when somebody else says them a different way, that's cool. Yes, they said it that way. But what I want to try what I want to try to do is to say, oh, what they're really saying is this based upon the way we say it.
What I'm gathering,
or rather, this is how it matches us.
What I'm gathering a little bit, pardon. What I'm gathering is that, in other words, this is a painful conversation, actually.
It would have to be.
To encounter what the outside thinks, and to say, oh, but my model is like this.
Yeah, it's like the entire.
So I can present that to you.
So that
I can present what the outside thinks.
So the two stacks where you have fiat coming across the top. It's kind of like there's one. The model speaking is one of those stacks, right? And this way of speaking just shoots fiat at it, trying to knock it down.
Right,
almost.
but we know that there's an isomorphism.
That's the other component of it. The model is meant because of its
of course
appropriation.
In the same way, this collection is meant to be.
Appropriation is meant to take that fiat, absorb it, and instead of letting the stack ricochet down, to actually reinterpret what is being said in a different way than what's actually being meant.
Right.
Or not necessarily being meant, but rather in a different context.
It's kind of
recontextualized. That would be really the
sentient
point.
Machine points again.
And yes, that is literally the entire quote-unquote inner workings of the sentient machine, is to recontextualize everything coming at it.
Right.
based upon everything that has come at it.
So we've got a challenge for the sentient machine right now. That challenge is this book report, let's call it, of the current state, the current state of the counterculture of capitalism. And let's understand capitalism as we have.
Which ironically is capitalism.
We have to acknowledge that counterculture can never be relegated to its terms and its categories, but is always something more.
Otherwise, it is simply capitalism.
Otherwise, it simply is that thing. Correct. So with that in mind, this is the presentation of the current state, let's say, of that counterculture.
So, my biggest probably motivate.
And we're just chilling.
My
Chilling.
my most motivated tangent right now is to produce an explanation. First of all, as to why the our idealized tribal culture
Yeah.
that we are doing, like it's a pseudo tribe, right?
Right.
It's not a real tribe. We're not discussing a real. We're talking about an idealized.
Right. What
tribe.
about it?
What does agile economics bring to the picture that bridges the gap of isomorphism from pre-split, pre-plateau to the post-plateau, in which no further plateau can be materialized? So when the path is simply collapse or reintegration.
It sounds like you have to prove that that's the final plateau as well, which is another challenge.
Sure, but I think the people that you're reading are making those points, especially in the accelerationism rhetoric, driving, which still has the same connotation as the bad interpretation. But the simplistic interpretation of driving everything through to its conclusion and seeing what that looks like and then interpreting that.
That's not accelerationism, right?
Sorry, correct?
That's the bastardization form.
I tried to say that.
Correct accelerationism is to understand the process of history itself in its actual transformation.
And
its potential.
And its extension into the future.
Its potential, its alpha,
So
and
see,
its omega,
so looking at it as like a particle in motion and seeing its based and looking at its history deriving its future. That's what I meant. So it is kind of bastardized, I guess, but it is still the same thing, in that you mentally take what it is, see it through to its ultimate conclusion, and then elaborate an analysis out of that.
But the seeing through, so I don't get what
Seeing
you get.
Seeing through hypothetically,
Are you trying
not to
to
actually push through.
Because the pushing part is what gets accelerationists, right wings in trouble, and not only that, but their complete misinterpretation of what accelerationism is.
So, taking an idea based on its premises and its historical development and extrapolating its conclusion, is that not what we're mentally doing? Like, it's a mental exercise. I'm not talking about pushing through physically. I'm talking about mentally understanding what what this history means for its progression.
With accelerationism, the main divide would then be to understand the process of history, quote unquote, the true process of true history is different than to understand where you are in history now and what's fucked up, and push what's fucked up, make more of it, because you know it's going to explode. That is the fucked up interpretation of accelerationism.
So when we capture that same idea with plateaus, with what was it, tempering, what was it,
Right.
Tunneled reality. Tunneled reality is the conclusion of it. That is the post
Right.
plateau. Tunnel reality is the post plateau. So we're talking Facebook feeds. Your mental structure is being fed information as to where you're delegating
Right.
your attention
And
to.
interestingly, if you pay attention to that and then jump out, yes, you can dip in and out of these structures. You can dip
Temporarily.
in. Sure, but you can watch it happen.
But everybody goes back on their Facebook.
Right.
That's just an
I'm just saying it's not.
It's an observation.
It's not an all or nothing. Everyone's in
Right,
it, or
right.
everyone's not in it.
So my point would be there is to take is where we line up with acceleration is that we have our apocalypse and our Armageddon, which are two events that linger on the back end of the final plateau. So once it's realized into tunneled reality, the path is now towards the apocalypse, and from the apocalypse to either Armageddon or reintegration, if you will. Right? That's
Right.
so they're making the arguments, for example, for where accelerationism is going to end. We are taking that picture and saying once it ends, this is what it looks like. Right? We are not supplying the fundamental details of,
Correct.
the exact happenings.
That's correct.
Just the overlay of what this is actually amounting to.
That's correct, because the accelerationist view would take into account true history, as it were, and would be
Yeah.
understanding that yes, this is a process of plateaus connecting up and up, and that these become more unstable as they
Yeah.
go, because you're fundamentally ignoring the stack below.
But we have a pseudo history, which means we cannot actually rely on that as a statement of our truth, but generally just point to these as examples of what we're trying to say. So this is one example of. So there are many forms of accelerationism, but they all look like the following: tunneled reality, leading into an apocalypse, leading into most probably Armageddon, or in
Okay,
other
this
words,
is
collapse.
a very good and productive distinction, I think.
That's good.
Yeah, I like it to tie in accelerationist thought with our model idea of
Because I think it's saying
apocalypse.
It's saying the same thing in just a more generalized generalist terms. Like, it's not because this guy did this and this guy did this and this guy did this. It's because these kinds of events lead to these kinds of events and that lead to these kinds of
Right.
events, and it's always going to look slightly different depending on which point in history we're looking from and the developmental state
Right.
of like, if you're looking at a village right now that is far removed from all things capitalism, you're not going to find as much of the plateaus. They're going to be there, but they're going to be reified quite differently. They're going to have closer elements to the isomorphism that used to exist, the one that we're seeking
Sure.
to kind of
Right.
put out as a
Like
full-blown
a
model.
community that's aware of capital, basically.
Yeah.
And somehow has an interface through the market.
And too weak to do anything about it too. So when it does encounter it, it just succumbs. It can't do anything. I mean, what are you
Oh.
gonna do with a military presence?
Gasoline? Mm. We like big boom.
So like, the point is never to say that like a plateau is an abstract notion, right? Like, yeah, we're saying you can't go below it, but it's a matter of, if you're thinking in these terms, like I do, like you do. If we're thinking in
Mhm.
like, how do I think in terms of cooking? I think about going to the store, buying coal. I'm thinking about going to the store, buying meat. I'm thinking about going
Yeah.
to the store, buying cleaners. I'm thinking about going to the store, buying this and that, the other. There
Right.
is no other thoughts outside of, for me. So that's why I can't break out of my plateau. The different context would change that. Maybe lower the intensity of it. But the top plateau, the tunneled reality, is still going to be governing everything that happens in the rural areas, right? Like it might be like a less direct effect, but it's not going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like where you don't get away from the top plateau, even if you're in a bumfuck village somewhere, not having Facebook for a while. As soon as you plug into it, you're plugged into it. Like you, and even then, like the supplies that they get are still dependent entirely on the market. Anyway, that was more of a rant. I think my biggest point is not to demonstrate the ability of the plateau's flexibility, because they are not as flexible as that makes it sound. Actually, it really points to a different kind of rigidity. That even though you can drop
Sure,
a little
yeah.
bit below, it's still going to be reified in the top. It all depends on its profits.
Yeah, not only that, but artificial scarcity is built in at every layer.
Exactly.
Every single layer you look at, you could see, wow, 95% has been swept away just for the 5%.
Which by its very definition means if you want access to a life that looks like a plateau below, or even a plateau below that, that is in itself a scarce resource for you to obtain.
Sure.
You have to buy it on the market. You have to navigate through the market to
Or
get there,
wander into the
and then be in
Amazon.
its mercy, waiting for it to just be sold away from
Sure.
underneath your feet.
Yep. So many points were made that there's no way around capitalism. Capitalism doesn't disappear. It doesn't.
So why don't we start the real discussion as to why,
There's
the
no outside.
as to how the post and the pre can look the same, and why agile economics tackles this question. Now, agile economics is based on the premise of we have a working industry and we have a working system in which you can put work in, get stuff out. Simple, right? Like capital gives us that.
Sure. Yeah.
Gives us that ability to sort of level that playing field. Let's ignore the finer points of accumulation. The basic premise is that all things being equal, work gets put in, product comes out, right? That benefits some sort, that fills some kind of niche.
We kind of skipped ahead here, maybe, but
Well, we did because we jumped from a ubiquitous village that everybody knows what to do into a post plateau in which everybody is specialized. Huge jump.
Sure.
Huge jump. But we're trying to point out to the isomorphisms as, look, where do we recapture those pre to post? And the first thing is the inversion of supply and demand to demand and supply.
Mm-hmm.
So economic activity is effectively based on what is being demanded, not by what can be supplied.
Okay. Now, this automatically implies a shelter because that's a wasteful activity, quote unquote, according to a normal thought of the ego market.
Okay, define wasteful here.
Wasteful is defined as doing an action that doesn't necessarily result in profit.
Well, it's already subsumed. Profit is not in question.
So then you just keep doing whatever you're doing until you no longer are viable because you can't pay your taxes and your property taxes, and then you get taken over by the state who has a monopoly on violence, and you're fucked.
Well, that's leading to a complete lack of differentiation
So how are we
with that
connecting this
activity
again?
and this activity. So that's not the point. That is literally not the idea behind it.
That's
So
the,
yeah,
the classic thought, though. So
no, fine.
how do you move forward?
I'm
in
not.
that?
I'm not sure what
So
question you're
The
asking.
question is, what shelter allows for an unprofitable activity to happen in a capitalist economy?
Shelter
For an
of
extended period of time.
capital.
And then capital I think becomes called something else. I think it's called resources.
Capital is itself the shelter. Meaning, the concerns of capital don't pass a certain boundary through which capital is dealt. Trade guild. That's the responsibility of the trade guild. The responsibility of the trade guild is to put the demanded supplies into the institution so that the members that demand it have access.
Okay, I mean, there's like so many points where you think this can just be exploited or taken over by somebody.
Of course.
Somebody can fuck it.
Of course, because this can't be built from the perspective of making profit. That's not the motivator for this
Okay.
for the setup.
So tell me, how does a system that shelters unprofitable activity expand?
It needs to rely upon profitable activity
Right.
that
Now we're talking. This is part of the shelter.
that limits.
This is like diplomacy.
That limits as to what part of the activity is going to be in the realm of profit to
Because
begin
at
with.
the very least, there's an energy
So
economy.
this is to point out why the trade guild supersedes or precedes on the stack the economy guild. Or wait, does it?
We can look it up.
No, it does not.
It would. You wouldn't think it would.
No, it does not.
Because what are you trading?
Yeah, you're right. And yeah, no, you're right. The mistake I made in my thinking is that I forgot about my own structuring of the natural guilds. So you start with a more permissive layer of activity, which is economics, which is dealing in which in this case is constrained by demand and supply in and of itself. So let's put it this way. There is a certain type of activity which we call economics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it involves creating supplies for what is demanded. That is his job. It doesn't look beyond that. So, unlike modern economics in general, right, what I'm saying is that this economy does not even deal with currency. Like the whole thing is, it doesn't pretends hyperstitionally, right, that there is no currency involved. Once we get to trade, we get to a guild that is solely responsible for negotiating demands of currency from the outside to the demands existent within the economic system underneath that it's managing.
In other words, it needs to pass forward some things. Some have to
Exactly.
be let through.
But none of those things will ever be currency.
No, it's the object of demand itself.
So what you have is a demand will bubble up, if you will, through the industry, through the diplomatic channels, to find the proper negotiable method to exchange currency for that, to supply that demand, and then it rolls back down. By the time it hits economy, it's gone through the entire diplomatic channel. It's gone through the entire industrial channel, which governs distribution with regard to which supplies need to be demanded. It arrives there.
That part sounds so much like communism.
It arrives there, and well, we went from the onset to say that you cannot circumvent the entire system, so you still need to channel things through it to some extent. this may seem a little bit more
Right.
centralized than it actually is, because we're not talking about a unified entity called
Yeah.
the trade guild, but rather desperate things that behave
And disparate.
as
And we're not even talking.
decentralized.
We're not even talking about, like
They're
a
communicating.
big community all under one umbrella.
No,
like
trade is more
You're
about-
having so many different
Trade is a protocol.
interest
Because
points
trade,
of interest.
yeah, because trade is a protocol. It's not a centralized mechanism to determine all of this. It's merely a way to propagate the activity, and it will
Right.
it'll arise as a concrete associative guild in the proximity realm to do the job for here, and disintegrate.
Right.
And it will arise here and disintegrate.
And it's like this makes me think about law and contract.
Or it can arise in your own head.
Do you know like law and
Mhm.
contract law, say between guilds, like I agree to do this, you agree to do that in a trade, so to speak, and kind of like, okay, now our respective
So we-
guilds are like
So we can
satisfied.
definitely not do that. A demand is not a contract. A demand is a manifestation of activity.
Right,
Activity
so
happens, demand appears.
I guess I'm thinking of like how it scales maybe, or like how things get bigger. It's all on the small point.
When you commodify it as products to be sold to fulfill the demand,
Yeah,
you
so-
lose the battle effectively.
So there are ways of identifying when things have gone completely sour. That this is beyond the purview of trade guild, even it's beyond the guild. We're straight back to capitalism, right? So need to be able to watch for that. That's part of the guild shelter. That in setting up trade routes, if you will. Oh, we agree to this as a contract. It's the flows of
so trade is the only place contracts is even relevant, because it's dealing with that shelter in line. That's where contracts do exist.
right.
But below trade, like if you look at the economy guild, there are no contracts. There are only demands. There are only supplies, and there might be an upward
Right.
negotiation of. In this
And
moment,
now-
where should certain
In a
supplies
way,
go?
contract doesn't seem like a bad word. It seems like stability for certain communities who want to offload some of their supply to some other.
Let's put it this way: there is an implicit contract in every demand, and
right.
if the guild is not functioning in such a way to manage this contract, as demand keeps coming up and coming up and coming up,
Mhm.
it's that is its measure of success and failure.
That's interesting. So
Because
like
it's-
you're laying out like a more broad contract as opposed to like per demand. It's kind of like the guild itself exists in the point of it.
Well, you can't do it per demand, because this is the stuff of dream, where the reality of the moment to moment to moment is that each moment reshifts the next set of activity. It's the meta schedule.
Mhm.
Because the meta schedule works the way it does, a moment can have a drastic effect on the successive next moment.
Right.
So even though before a moment happened, it was going to be this way, because this moment happened, it's totally not going to be this way anymore.
Right.
So there's that's like the main
That's
difficulty to account for,
Reminiscent
which
of the
isn't
market itself too.
which makes it impossible to capture in a
Codified in a law
codified
contract.
way. Yeah,
Right.
it kind of steps outside that realm of being able to lend itself
Right.
to that.
I find it so like really interesting how the economy shifts in our view with the model from supply to demand as the big motivating factor of society.
How can I sell whatever
Right.
whatever thousands of
Right.
gadgets I just spend
through
my
marketing
investments to produce?
Marketing, of course, right? So it's like top down thing. Oh, you need this. You need
Feed it
this.
to them, yeah.
That's a very interesting distinction, and something that's very important to this idea of a new type of society, of relating, a new type of economy. Like we are talking about transformation of the economy existing as it is, the way that people interact and all this kind of stuff.
Well, dude,
Like we're talking a full paradigm shift here.
the idea that currency is not even part of economy. How alien is that to
Right.
to
It's
any
a
contemporary thinking?
laundering mechanism, right? Which is
Well, I'm not
very
saying
convenient.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm saying like the fact that our
Not
discussion of
even-
economy does not include currency. Currency is included in trade and trade only, and in a very specific way. That is
Currency
to
implies a structured value of a commodity, I guess.
currency implies laundering, and laundering as a unique feature
It implies quality,
can
getting fucked.
can still be utilized by transformation of something into currency, and currency transformation is something else. So because that is the context in which the guild exists already, not to deal with that is well, it's
Right.
really, really dumb.
Right. No. Yeah, currency, absolutely. This whole money laundering layer inserted in society that we all deal with, that it's foreign. It's alien as fuck.
It's alien as fuck, but since we're talking about the binding of capitalism with the medicine, if you will, the question of currency is no longer about abolition or retention, but again, context. What is the context that currency can actually serve
Right.
the guild?
Feels very easy to say, oh, money is just a tool, right?
But-
Context
but unless,
matters.
But unless you
And we can
really,
dig into
really
the
narrow
context.
down to what its utility should
What it's
be,
doing, what it can do,
it's going to do a lot more things than it should be
what
doing.
it can do very badly.
And yeah, like
Awareness.
support, like, higher contracts for killing and stuff like that. Currency is very
Right.
capable of doing this. So yeah,
It's very typical. And just I want to note, I love where the conversation has been going today. I laid out half an hour. It's probably already half hour over. But I like how, we're kind of staying focused here, and I think we're on a good track. I want to get into these nitty-gritties of
no,
economy.
we didn't
and-
we didn't tackle industry or diplomacy. Going all the way up to trade.
I don't even have the monitor on, but I guess so. So we've been displaying this
So yeah, so
the
what I'm,
natural guilds.
so what I'm trying to get to here is that it's not that we're trying to skip those two. It's that they're best actually understood as intermediaries between what happens in economy and trade guilds. They're kind of filling a
Interesting.
few gaps, because trade needs diplomacy to understand its relationships with the other, with what it's trading with, and industry is sitting on top of economy because it keeps track of what is in the economy itself. So what are the demands and what are the
Right.
supplies? So that gives us a database, if you will, of management to make decisions about in a
Mhm.
more
It's a
global scale
typical
than
stacking
each
structure, I think.
individual economic activity is given away. So all
Right.
of that really culminates into trade as being the external interface to the rest of the world, and that gives us our whole passive isomorphism with a previous tribe, on the same premise of something is needed, you need to go out into the world, you need to figure out where to get it from, and that's the work that's being done. There's your demand happening, there's your supply happening, and on those terms, we can bring back the same sort of notions as we've had before. The rest is, of course, specific to the circumstance and a matter of heuristic. Is it going to be clear cut?
Are you talking
No, it's
economy
not.
there?
Well,
or-
yeah, I'm talking about
Yeah.
also being you in your situation, me in my situation, somebody in their situation. It's going to look different. We're not in the pre-scenario. It doesn't look different. Everybody needs their chisel. Everybody needs an axe. Everybody, right? In this case, everybody needs food. Everybody needs shelter. Everybody needs whatever.
Right.
The point I'm trying to make really is that those things are being in. That is what's being in demand. Shelter, food, clothing, whatever, is put up to the tribe to fulfill, and the tribe fulfills by somebody going out and doing the activity, supplying it.
Right.
Same pictures that you see. Nobody's coerced into doing it. The demand is seen.
Right,
the demand
right,
is
right.
fulfilled
Yes.
through one's own itch
That's
to do
like
stuff.
institute and corporation dichotomy we've kind of set up.
So the difference being is that it used to be close family or familial relations. It's now siloed,
Right.
systemic relations.
So I think we need to talk a little bit about the launch, I guess, if you will, between selfish behavior, if you will, and like how do we even, okay, I'll just, I got nothing to do, I'll work and help this guy. But how is it that people have nothing to do? It's because they've already been, somehow they have their livelihood, their house is available, they don't have to work
or their very access to activity has been cut off.
or we're all at the plateau in which we have a house. I have an apartment. We've got a house. Whatever.
What do I have
we've
to
got
do
that.
to cut down a tree?
We all have something.
Can I go outside, cut down a tree if I need one, for firewood?
Yes.
No.
You can.
Like, no. Look. If I go out there, cut down that tree, what will happen?
Well, not that one.
Exactly.
But try being a little bit more of a punk.
But you know what I mean? Like if I start cutting down that tree because I need some firewood,
You've got to
out of
season
whatever
it.
reason.
You've got to season it for a year or two.
Well,
you know
my
that,
point
right?
being is that the cops will show up and they'll ask me why the fuck am I walking around with an axe
I'll
in
take
broad
you
daylight?
to a place with a tree, chop it down. You got to season.
You got to
it
go
down.
to the specific place where you can chop down trees. That's my point.
Some are better than others. Let's call it at that.
No, it's like this artificial.
Because you can always steal, quote unquote.
It's an artificial constraint on the abundance that is actually
Right.
still there.
Of course. Haunting and plaguing us until we be right back.
Guild stack.
What do you mean?
Look at the guild stack.
What you talking about?
Guild stack. So we made the point of talking about agile economy
Agile. Yep. Mm-hmm.
which is our corporation slash institution
Per use.
divide, and how that jives with supply demands being made by the institution. Corporations exist only to fulfill supplies, and the entire dynamic works by enablement of, if you need training to create to create supplies for some things, that is demanded, that is supplied.
Wait.
And then people
Training
work.
is supplied by another corporation.
Everything is supplied by corporation.
Right.
Everything, including what
So,
the list of demands are.
Let's paint the picture there.
But overall,
It seems weird.
But the overall arc and tone is that this is the institution.
So you've got
But
this
it's like
institution.
but it's not centralized. It's like you have many
Right.
institutions. You
So,
don't have.
but the
a single
institution is like a sort of
It's
almost like a union, but not really. It's a decentralized, distributed, care about the people force.
you can almost, you shouldn't, but you can almost reduce it to the picture of the list of all current demands and the entire system to manage that. Like how does demand get channeled to the proper places to be supplied? That's the institution. But underneath it all, it's actually a bunch of corporations working together that combine their efforts into creating the supply
Now
being
this
demanded.
seems like a very specific system
So-
set up as a dichotomy almost of
Mhm.
like the bottom is demanding, quote unquote, and the overlords are supplying.
And yeah, that's the only job of being quote unquote an overlord is for supply and nothing else.
And that goes wrong though. That does go
Yeah,
wrong.
but let me just finish the picture from like your personal experiential point of view. What this looks like is that you don't have to do anything. However, if you're bored, you can learn to do this, and that, or you can go do this, and this if you know how to do it.
So
If you don't know how to do it, you can do this first and that.
let me
second.
ask,
And
in your
so on it goes.
in your personal opinion, do you think like some type of organization could exist which just trains people up and says, oh, you can, or if you want, you can do this, and just kind of like as brings people in? What is the limits to that kind of an organization?
So the fundamental connection that we can actually draw from the pre-commodification plateau era
Right.
is this concept of having these pre-built set of skills that you bring to the table
Right.
that everybody else is also bringing to the table.
So
Right?
education.
So you have to have already a kind of a core DNA that will constrain all the activities to to an organism. Right?
Okay.
Like not willy-nilly, but to an
Now,
organism. And based
this is
upon
very
everybody
offensive
having
to anarchists.
based upon everybody having, so to speak, the same understanding about the context that they're in, jobs are not delegated but volunteered for.
Okay.
This is needed. I can do this. Okay,
Wait,
there's nobody doing that. That's needed. I can do
course.
that. That's the village
Yes.
picture.
Now this type
Now
of
bring that into the scenario of where your skills being taught are available on your volunteerism, and jobs to be done are available in your volunteerism. Everybody has
volunteerism.
everybody's brought up in the same manner from almost the get-go.
Okay,
Again,
so-
there's bootstrapping to
So
be
first off,
involved.
yes, that doesn't just happen.
That doesn't happen. There's bootstrapping involved pre that situation.
Right.
That's basically all of the entire self progression into membership. That's what it's for.
Right.
To have members, so that
Yeah.
once you have members, they
So-
have that DNA.
But like members are so awesome, and they do like the most amazing of shit. Like
But they're
it's just
still
without
separated
fail,
by domains.
Without fail, almost guaranteed. If we can, like work together and identify like that and figure out what's going on together.
Well, yeah, that's been the entire point all of this time. Why did we bother with SOTs? They were basically almost members.
Right, and there were members. And,
Tried.
and
They
there were.
They
and
decided
couldn't-
against it.
They couldn't figure out how to work together through that membership specifically.
So yeah, the entire
Yet.
idea of core DNA driving the inner decision making that is present within everybody
Now-
makes this institution decentralized, yes, but at the same time reactive.
There's something that has to be brought up before this, and it is the, I guess, the nature of holonic organization, in that you are in layering of holons is that when you're having an emergence, it is something is similar on the layer below. When something is emerging at a higher layer,
Well, I think that's covered with
A
the
layer
complex
below-
adaptive systems.
I want to, I guess, refresh, but this has to be part of that thought.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That thought
It is,
is that
entirely based on that.
Why would everyone have the same little bits of culture, if you will, to do this behavior?
Mhm.
Well, it's because they all come together and something happens at a higher layer, if you will. And this is, I think, plateaus. This is plateauing.
But to make the argument, we all have DNA made out of the same material. We all have
Of course. So it's already
a
happened
human body and a phenome
everywhere.
to look very much
For
similar.
examples,
We all
it's all
carry
happening.
We all carry the same potent neural networking that everybody else does. Where do we stop repeating and say, oh, this is where we break away from that pattern and no.
At the ego, that's where we stop that,
Well,
and then
we
we have
did.
egos all the way up.
Well, we did, and lo and behold, there's a particular problem associated with that. And so,
Right.
what does the argument really boil down to is to the reversion of back into growth from within.
This is, by the way, it complements on that, but this is like a core trope of like, where did it all go wrong? Notice when it stopped being, let's say, complex adaptive systems, this holonic stacking of layering, as soon as your unit at each layer became the same thing, in other words, ego, your unit became ego, and then ego, and then ego, and then ego, right? Before that it was, cell, tissue, organ, etc., right?
Well-
and then it became ego, and then it was ego and ego and ego,
It's not
which
just
is completely
it's not just
arbitrary.
It's not just became ego. We talked about this maybe 2 meetings ago. There is a point in which currency launders and you bottom out at it. This is why ego sits above that laundering point and everything else is below it. Because you transpose everything, all qualities into quantities. Those quantities can now be processed and fed back into whatever. It's the same conversation we just had with
Right.
chunking and JavaScript.
So
You can't
quality-
represent your integer
quality
with
and
an
ego,
integer.
though.
You can't represent your integer
You're talking
with
now
a plot.
about quality and ego. How does that link?
I'm talking about, I'm trying to describe it. That code example I gave you, when you have to create an entire chunk of a program to represent the integer that was
Sure.
already part of the programming language, so you can
Yeah, you're
so
going
your
back
program
down
can discuss integers.
to be coherent with things of the base,
Now,
the fundamental.
now imagine like that entire chunk that's representing integers being just replaced by another chunk that is also pretending to it has the same interface, but it's cheaper.
But it's money.
It's cheaper and it siphons off the activities in some way or whatever.
Right.
The point being is that the external program doesn't see the difference. And that's what
Right.
that's where the commodity
That's
is
the
so
point.
insidious.
Yes.
It doesn't. The external part does not see a difference where the internal part actually causes a different
Even
functions to happen.
When the individuals themselves experiences the switch between one system and another, they hardly even think too much about it. You've got money, okay, I want that, blah blah, exchange.
Right, money equals whatever item you're getting with it. So, what was that in relation to? I kind of lost track of the.
In relation to floating spiritually along the path of a river.
Oh no! You were trying to say why there's a breakaway between the complex adaptive system, and why is
Yeah,
ego
to
all
the
of a sudden?
ego.
Because
Yeah.
because ego is transactional.
That's a point we make. I've never heard it anywhere
The nature
else.
of ego is transactional, therefore it doesn't see anything existing beyond whatever is being traded by value. And so the monetary system sort of allows a supplemental language to sit on top of language that doesn't
I
allow
think-
doesn't allow any further reification below that.
Let me posit a reason for that is that the ego is being monetized, is being quantified. The ego itself, in other words, the person himself.
What's the first product?
I am worth this much. There you go.
It's the individuality
Right?
is
That's
a product.
that's what allows the whole thing to be swept away.
You mentioned a good point. I don't think I clarified this bridge very well. So you have language, right?
Of
If
course.
language has its own qualitative sort of emergence out of the experiences of the people that speak it. Fine. Nothing wrong there. This is about the problem of counting. When your language develops the capacity to count,
Oh no. Look out.
when your language develops the capacity to count, the other qualitative elements of the language can now be categorized, or in other words, enumerated. By enumeration, they can be processed through other algorithms by
Sure.
being numbers.
Yeah. Even grandma.
This sort of bootstrap allows all qualities to be represented by their enumerated quantities.
How much is grandma worth?
So if you stop or bar all interpretation of qualitative interpretation from being passing through the threshold of quantification, like it's stuck.
Sure.
Like it just doesn't go back down.
Is this
it's just stuck in a number.
Are
Stuck
you
in
talking
another
about
number.
like medicinal? Is this medicinal or
I'm
what?
talking about how our language is driving our the part of our problem. We've
okay.
developed math. Math
In that
made
things
us
it
categorize
doesn't jump
things.
back out to the quality.
Categorization takes away individuality in that you're no longer just Brian. You're now man. You're now middle-aged. You're now married. You're
Worthy,
whatever.
valuable.
You're an employee.
amazing.
Category. None of them are you.
Mhm.
You're none of, even being Brian. The name Brian. So many Brians out there,
I know.
right?
Dime a
Like so
dozen.
even but what does that cause us to think? Oh, which Brian are you talking about? There's no uniqueness
You
to
mean
any story,
not the
anyone's
best
story.
one?
Our stories,
Oh, the best one.
our living stories, universally are fundamentally completely erased. If we want to talk about neglect,
Right.
this will be that.
And by this whole social media storm,
We're just the categories.
in which we think, oh, I'm becoming immortal because I have all my posts on Facebook.
So, if you're only whatever categories you are, Mr. Right-wing sympathizer,
I'll take it.
right? Whatever whatever categories you end up being through, when somebody else is thinking about you, they're not going to think about you. They're not going to think about this Brian that was born to his mother that was lived
Like,
in
oh, that guy
in
thinks
Alberta,
this way.
that had Gary Goodridge as a stepfather for some time, and all of these like different elements that shaped you and would turn you into the person that you are. No, there's only the categories and the classifications by which you exist right now in that moment of processing, and due to those categorizations, you are this, that, this, the other thing, and the other thing, and none of those
Right.
things are you.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
So,
And by the way,
and you
I
can't come out of this categorization.
I just wanna say,
if
so
you
I-
only
so I don't
ever
get-
bounce there.
so I don't get locked into a categorization. I've always felt myself like left side, left wing, if you will, as far as like freedoms and all that kind of stuff. Like classical libertarian, no, even that fucks you, right? Like not libertarian, but classical,
Simple questions,
like
dude.
freedom of speech. Like I think that was left. That's a left-wing attribute.
Simple questions. Here, that'll answer like all of the categorization shit,
Okay.
like straight up.
Do I like
Abortion.
Donald Trump?
No, abortion.
Oh.
Yay or nay?
Well, if you got to do it, context.
Where does that land you?
Left-wing. It is down to a dumb set of questions, isn't it?
Here's a tougher.
And that's how I feel. I feel
here's
on
a
the left
tougher
side
one.
of most of those issues.
Here's a tougher one, and please don't jump to the extreme cases. Just think through the most average.
Okay, I'm breathing. Question me.
Gun control, the ability to utilize
one for me.
utilize tools that need an extreme amount of care. Should that be free for all, or does it make more sense, like say in the case of driving a car,
Yeah,
does it make more sense to actually have training involved?
I'm on the car side.
So that's
100%,
that's
but
a
that's a
typical
slippery slope.
It is. I tried to.
That's a slippery
why
slope.
I'm asking you not to go into the extreme is because
Right.
you can
I
see.
agree
you,
with
you
it.
Can, you can see that
Totally fucking agree.
It makes sense that guns, like any other
Dangerous shit.
potentially very dangerous utility that can be utilized for something,
Right.
needs an enormous capacity of training and understanding of how to utilize
Yeah.
it safely. No brainer.
And I
That
agree,
is
like,
not a right side position.
let's say a 5-day limit, a week limit to
Men-
get it. You know, like have
mental
they,
history.
They've been pulling that up. Fuck yeah. Like no, you
Tho-
can't
those are the
out of
typical
the
issues.
blue buy a gun. I don't agree with that.
That is the left position. That is not the right position. The right position is the extreme of, yes, criminals don't obey laws. Well, cool, but there is a lot less of them,
Right.
typically speaking. And if you're in an environment that doesn't really require crime to be a practical component of your existence, do you really think gravitation towards violence is going to be the norm? Nobody wants to spend their
Right.
energy.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
want to spend
And
that
that's a
energy.
very interesting point too, which a left or a right wing point is like, well, criminality tracks the economies of, like, let's say a region. If economy goes down, people are tough, hard on their luck, they're out of their house, all kinds of things, just a cascading effect of everybody gets fucked while crime increases.
I think that that's a misdirection. It's not the economy. It's what is being supplied. The economy could be like fucking great, but the only person profiting from it sits at the top.
And what's being supplied, I'm not really sure, like,
So
the necessities of life, as long as that's supplied, then people
you
are
get
chill.
you basically get a destabilizing situation in a society when basic needs disappear, evaporate. This isn't a problem
Basic
with
needs,
this isn't a problem with the economy per se.
Basic good needs.
Not in the strictest sense, because it's not a problem with the economy, because the economy is more of like an inert platform onto which to do the activities. The actual
I think this must be like over
it's
analysis.
it's more like a medium. It's more like a medium where you can like push buttons on the dashboard.
It's got to
and
be
do
over
things.
analysis. I think the point was that all these
Well, in the
all
economy as
these
it is,
left wing people in their high and beautiful economic places, they don't understand what it's like to have a low economy where people are into crime, and then you have to think about defending your life and all this kind of other stuff. right? That's the take from the right wing take.
And the entire presupposition here is that it's a lack of currency that differentiates successful economy versus unsuccessful one. And the argument entirely being from the guild's
Currency.
perspective isn't currency, it's activity.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So
okay.
the economy
I get you.
is a side issue
I love that you would bring up that point.
prevents certain necessary activities from just taking place.
Because you basically steered this whole conversation back towards the guild. You're like, fuck this economy and scarcity and artificial scarcity and bullshit.
It's not
The guild is fundamentally different.
right.
That's what it sounds like you're saying to me.
Right, because if you look at it from the perspective of just looking at poverty in general, it's more like a historical trend as to where it exists and where it is enforced. So if you
Right.
if you're from the South and say black, right, there's already an identity assigned to it.
For sure.
So the only
Yeah.
so basically the only like sort of social movement one can make out of itself is to either completely ignore this initial bootstrap and become assimilated into the more traditional northern style of existence, or shunning, which incidentally exacerbates the problems within the initial culture to begin with. The culture is shunned,
Right.
and all activity therefore is shunned.
I think it seems you're talking about, I could probably just take off on a thing, but like this idea of like a well-up strapping young Negro or whatever, you know, like and then to be called out by your own culture as an Uncle Tom or whatever for like associating with the white culture, quote unquote.
Who do you see being presented in the media as the success out of that story? It's only the kind of person that completely abandons the origin where they came from,
where they came from, yeah.
and they're judged by their capacity to adopt and regurgitate the normalized culture, right? In essence,
Right, and
it does fuck
nobody
all.
should. We are all a they who came from. They came from somewhere. We're all fucking like that.
But no, but very few people actually believe that.
We're all a they.
So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. The economic rules, the way they're set up, they're just arbitrary algorithms or protocols to change one amount into another amount, and the rest is whoever gets in control of the dashboard gets to pick and
Right.
choose where
So-
which amounts go where.
Now I'm thinking of very, let's say, psychedelic things in that, let's say we had good culture, quote unquote, good culture. What does that mean in the terms of like a guild sort of at the neighborhood level? What is a wholesome guild culture penetrating to the neighborhood level of these
I have opinions.
places? Right?
I
What
have
is
opinions.
How do you introduce that to like people who are very aloof, let's say?
The first thing you gotta come to terms with, and this is going to be very difficult, is the notion of no coercion.
And we're all very aloof. No coercion. First principle.
No.
And that's to treat self as guest. A
You can't-
guest,
you-
a guest does not even presume to.
you
to-
can't fix somebody else's way of thought.
A guest doesn't presume to change things. That's what a master might do.
And since everybody is addressing everybody else as a guest would address a master,
See, okay.
there is no
Feeling it.
room for
Feeling it.
No room for it.
But like these little details get lost in the whole
Oh, absolutely.
guild structure.
Because
you know.
Well, it doesn't just get lost in that. It gets lost in the fact that the entire way that this is being communicated is us as sort of like an authoritative source of information trying to install this information to somebody else, which falls flat on its face when you talk about zero coercion.
That's
So-
right. You're saying that's how it appears, and this is
Exactly.
why we bring up the charlatan, the zeitgeist first, and then the charlatan.
And a very, very, very necessary understanding that there is a pattern in nature that starts from within to without. The tree grows from the seed, the phenome from the
Right.
genome. There is like this core that's already there.
Isn't this interesting?
That is expressed in different ways after the fact. It is not the other way around, which kind of where you have individualism fall flat on its face because it's trying to paint the picture in the other way.
the core. You just articulated some stuff.
So
that,
there's already
that
a-
I would link with desire.
So what I would say there, really, is that there's already an existent bootstrap, and the neglect of that bootstrap is the driver for all the results that you have.
And that's
If
the
you
ego,
don't think it's there,
the ego split. This is the big separation.
mhm.
The,
To
great,
remi-
the
to-
great schism, if you will.
To remind everybody what ego is, it's the reiteration of the self, which is itself and a phenomena of self-reference within moments, appearing in each moment,
Right.
reified into a narrative, and then further reified into a continuous narrative. So when the self narrative can appear and disappear over time,
And this
ego-
furthering.
ego sort of gives it a sense of permanence by causing the self to be referenced by other elements in narrative construction. So it
And that
becomes a
the
category.
reification is really the key, in that the artifacts reify it back again, that self of the environment. It's like a whole patterning, like a codependency between your environment. Of just
Yeah.
your ego keeps pulling up your own ego.
You can say that the self-narrative is reified in each successive moment due to the constituents of the moment, and the self-reference simply drives what it is. The self is a reification of the self-reference in narratological formulations, so parts of stories and parts of algorithms and parts of there's a reference to the self, and then furthermore to that, the ego is a permanence to this self-reference by assigning it to a specific category or an enumerated slot of what
Now-
self is,
That's very interesting, because often the question
and then you could
would
trade
come up.
what self is in those slots.
Often the question would come up, what the fuck are you talking about?
And why would you trade that? You would trade that to get accesses to different dashboards. Because it could be very, very painful to constantly put that every button you ever press on your dashboard results in punishment.
Right?
You want to move away from that, but the only way to do that is to switch with another slot. So that means either undermine it or
Another dashboard of sorts.
What's interesting is that in the modern mythological sense, you see this most often attributed to women. Like this idea of undermining people and just like playing these social
Yes, the female, the feminine trickster archetype,
right, and the irony
the
being
deceptor.
the irony being though is that this trait is fundamentally far more amplified in the man-children that are in the
This
control.
manipulation idea, right?
Except it's just not called that, right? So why I'm finding this funny is that the myth blames women, but the most fundamental actors of this behavior are men. Now,
Men who haven't manned up yet.
no,
Men.
it's ironic in many different ways. It speaks to the fact that the gender ideals, as they're known normally,
Right.
are actually pointing to something else going on here. And secondary to that, it's that when like in the way that we developed our mythology, right? What this means is that we're talking about unrealized individuals. Like our mythology places the entire idea of order and man and male in the realm of concrete realizations that are then returned back into the core, which is what's called female. So like returning the seed back into the soil to continue the process.
Sure, no, I get that. Are you referencing like the pseudo-gender work with the models there? Because you've never really talked about this composting
I'm kind of all over
operation.
the place, so this is not going to be the best treatment of the subject. So I'm going to kind
feel
of like...
free, if you got some ideas, man, lay them down. I mean, this is the notepad. We are at a development meeting right now, and nobody's watching. Sure, maybe somebody is.
I'm actually more amused by the fact that the mythology, the pseudo-gender mythology, is fucking itself in the ass in the end, because the way it portrays women and the way it produces men is the same picture. And so it is in its own setup.
Wait, the way it produces men and women is the same.
No.
I didn't
The
get
way
what you said.
the way it
Pseudo-gender.
the way it describes women, the way
Right.
it's
Yep.
yeah, basically the way women are described by it, and
As
way,
like a
and,
kind of beta, if you will.
right,
Like the underclass sort of thing.
and the men
And this is built in.
produced by it, and I'm talking about people who will what do you call it, superstitiously identify their penis with
Right,
with the words.
Yeah.
So what for those people who are that superstitious, the irony of the situation is that it produces men in the way it portrays women.
Right.
Needy, conniving, backstabbing manipulators.
There you go.
So the very thing that is so looked down upon by this mythology, right? The inability to use reason itself. The very thing shunned by this rhetoric is its product.
Don't we love like core ironies, like just the most serious of ironies, like the deepest, the most baddest asses of ironies?
So
We do find them.
So here's a funny statement to make. The most feminine men in the patriarchy, the most feminine elements of the patriarchy as it describes itself are the patriarchs.
The ones submitting to the overall system itself as kind of queen overlord at the top, separating from God, right, creating a whole schism, saying I am God, I'm not submitting to another higher male, if you will, masculine, the unknown God.
So I'm not saying they get to be insulted by being called women, because I'm not taking the stance of like being called a woman is an insult.
Right?
I'm taking the stance that by their own definition, they're calling themselves women and insulting themselves because they
Right.
feel that to be the insult. And they fear it so much so that all reaction is outward.
Now, what I was kind of alluding to or thinking about was like the idea of like these hierarchies where, let's say the pyramids, and you think you're the pharaoh, you're God, right? But that kind of creates a disconnection between, quote unquote, the strange
Mr.
loop,
Elon Musk.
if you will. If you take yourself at the top
That's
of
what
one
I'm
of these
thinking about.
hierarchies, right,
Elon.
to be as God, then you fundamentally disconnect
Well-
yourself from the bottom because you don't submit yourself to that one God above you again, which loops down to the
So,
back.
Elon
Because you
Musk.
think you are at the top.
Why am
You, a conglomeration of fucking cells and shit,
I was saying before, he's an image.
are God.
There's no person behind Elon Musk. There's an image,
No,
but
I,
there's no
I
person.
get all that, yeah.
Look
I think
at
there's-
the trend of activities
I
that are
just want to
happening.
bring back this...
But look, no, I'm trying to make it concrete.
this is your critique of Hinduism and that, right?
My critique extends to all ontological fundamentalisms.
Right.
When you have an ontology as something fundamental,
Which is still
underneath,
holding on to, then that means the cycles of your consciousness are still filtering through such an object, causing all kinds of karma,
You're laundered through currency.
suffering, etc.
You're subject to categorization and you're laundered through currency. Which means there is a hard bottom which you cannot penetrate. Quantity does not translate to quality. It could take the most subtlest of forms. I mean, the most explicit form is to literally like sell your soul and get a monetary
Or in other
or
words,
whatever that means, you know, like
to say you are a god, or to have this object of desire, imagining that you are God,
well, that's just back to the
right?
charlatan.
One
Right?
with all.
That's a charlatan thing.
But that's also kind of like a critique of like Hinduism and all that kind of stuff, like the still subtle identification with deity and all this kind of stuff, even though in experience it's all constructed, right? And
Ephemeral.
there is that ephemeral, right? There is that connection, yes, but you to make it is to kind of ends up
to not
clinging.
to not recognize the cycle of self-references that are just functional to the cycles
Right.
of self-formulation narratives, to the
And-
cycle of permeating the narrative over and over and over again for transactional purposes. There's all these different layers, and you might untangle
yeah.
you might untangle one, but unless you untangle it all the way down to the root, you're just sort of stuck
You're not
rebuilding.
seeing- you won't see how the others are tangled as well. In the
Well,
same
since
thing.
you're rebuilding another narrative of self, it could be recuperated into yet another ego, just in a more subtle capacity, to a different market. A market that doesn't talk about money in the coin sense, but in like your
this close.
attainment or your
Right.
your
Yeah.
value in the hierarchy of being
Yeah, I
a
get it.
religious leader, or
And
another way of
That'll
transforming
always,
quality to
for
quantity.
me, that will remain a significant indicator, just of like, and kind of one of your thoughts that you've always like brought that up, that point, and I think
I
it
will
is
beat
it
it.
is
I
significant.
will kick it. I will punch it anytime
makes
it
you
comes
think.
up.
It makes you think about the I have arrived moment that people have and all that kind of stuff.
I'll give you like,
and there are many moments. There's so many like moments.
for just context, like what triggered this for me is that the whole non-self doctrine coming from Buddhism, and the way it tried to portray the experiences one can recognize in meditation as, you know, being fleeting and sort of like a discussion about the disconnect it has with the kind of conceptualization one would have about what I am. So what I am tends to be like a stable idea. The meditative interaction shows you that
The
it
connection
tends
with-
to shift around.
Connection with the real, if you will,
and
to
so,
try and compare that through feedback.
And so in a lot of different poetic forms, the Buddhist doctrine tries to illuminate the point that it just keeps shifting. It just keeps shifting. And the consequence of the shift is if you don't want it to shift, key component there. If you're expecting it not to shift, because the idea of I
Right.
is not expected to actually shift.
The cascade of rewards and punishments.
But it
calculation.
doesn't experience. There's going to be a fundamental outflow of some kind of punishment in the form of pain,
Right away.
or rather, there will be some kind of pain that can be.
You'll
and,
feel it
and,
right
and
away.
very much is right to be experienced in narrative form as a sort of punishment to the self. I fucked up. I should do better.
Right.
That this self-talk is already a kind of punishment, right? Like you're just recognizing self-deficiencies.
Interesting though how we have this whole facility available to us that we can set up expectations for reward or punishment, and on the fly just feel it, what feels good and bad, right? But this becomes a programming machinic type nature, which ends up, of course, through a
Well, if it
classic,
has enough repetition.
through outside egos seeking reward, you get pushed off, and right.
I don't know why I never thought to say this before, but really to understand why the market can entrench itself into this process is really due to the fact that there is the capacity for positive feedback. Right? Because when you commodify something, but the feedback is still remains positive to the neglect of some other more mundane details, specifically ones that you normally don't care about, but somebody else has to.
So marketing is positive feedback.
It has that ability to sort of bypass all the different things that were already off to the side, and so when you segment by like this forever, you got a very, very, very disconnected, siloed system. It's like boiling the frog metaphor, right? Like, it doesn't know to jump out, except this is false, by the way. The frog knows to jump out. But, but in the false metaphor, there's this story where if you
Actually,
heat
the walls
water,
are too high, so it can't get out. So
now that's just making sure it happens. But like in the metaphor, it's supposedly the frog doesn't jump out, not because it can't, but
because it was too slow, it got too hot.
But it didn't realize it was too hot before it was too late, which is absolute bullshit.
Okay. And
but
so
this
in the
is
moment it's too late. Now
but
it
it's
starts
a
jumping.
Good metaphor.
Could it get not out earlier? Are you saying if it jumped earlier?
I'm saying.
Did the pot change size?
I'm saying if you cater
suddenly?
to a certain way, and he's catered to a certain way, and I'm catered to a certain way by this market, and it's all kind of ingeniously set up in a way that it makes you neglect my problems, it makes me neglect his problems, and it makes him neglect your problems.
Never
you can
mind.
you can actually play the game of being the good friend to everybody while shitting on everybody at the same time.
Yeah. And frog
And
physiology
there
is not a component.
You
of
have
this.
neglect. It's not it's not a singular thing. Like you got to look at it as a network of
on
things
the opposite
happening.
side, this looks like the guild.
And that's how it's hidden too.
The
It's
guild.
it's not a system. It's systems.
So the counterculture of this is the guild, which is existing to create spaces where it needs setting up demand networks.
Well, the only thing it's doing is it's recognizing this as the problem and working around it in a way that mitigates its output.
Right. So, if we want to talk about where is this book going, yes. The actual, what does the guild look like? What is it doing? That's the discussion. Alpha, Omega. Alpha, Omega. That's what we got to think. But before we do that, I think we should take a short break and be right back. Looks like we got about, let's call it 45 minutes, but we don't really know. That would be the maximum.
Yep.
And
we'll do it.
well, yeah, we'll do it.
We didn't even describe computation yet, because that's the active part of...
We so much did, and also we didn't get into any of the report that I've created. So there's so much
Do you know-
context, and we can just blast through it. We can blast. We can
Sure.
plow, blast. Give me 10 minutes.
Okay.
I'll do all 5 pages in 10 minutes.
Dude.
Something like that, right?
Dude.
So, but we got some time. 45
Dude.
minutes.
I
you'll
know
like
I'm
it.
a hard ass, and I know I talk a lot,
It-
but
Here's my thing,
I am very much interested in this. I've only struggled with reference points.
and it will lead right back into what you want to talk about with the conclusion of the things doing stuff.
Fair enough. So for the conclusion, we'll talk about it will be the domains and the build up from there.
I'll leave that up to you.
Well, I'm trying to cap off the guild.
You're trying to put sentient machine back into this too, right?
Yes. So my point there being is like we started off with the tribe which has
Right.
this same set of DNA. We need to have that DNA completed in the guild dynamics
So,
portion to create the
here's an
functional
idea.
isomorphism.
Let's show,
And we showed one part of it.
Jenny, let's show that back in chronology, back in this pre-Civ tribe, that there was sentient machine that existed, basically on top of medicine machine. So that'd be the ideal, is to show that there is corrections and this kind of stuff, and that it existed before.
So the discussion of domains.
So there's a perceptive quality that has existed, which is isomorphic with the perceptive quality that we're looking at when we create this guild shelter idea, the post modification.
So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of taking those 3 top guilds,
Right.
relating
Right.
them to the tribe to show where where
Yes.
they appear.
Can
and
we
then
do that
taking,
fast?
And then taking that and showing how, since we set up since we already set up the isomorphism with the economy, it's the same thing.
I feel like language is tight with tribes. Like, that's kind of a given. A
It
lot of it
is.
is given.
It is.
It's like we're all in the
So-
same domain. In
So
other
I have an
words,
idea about
right?
that. So instead of like domains, right? You have butchery. You have fire making or fire processing.
And so,
you
so
have
Genya,
tool
what
making,
you're
you have
describing here
hunting.
is
you
that tribes are their own little thing, but above them is civilization just lurching overhead, ready to start a fire, ready to carve an arrow, ready to do this. There's a layer above all the tribes, and that's
with a far
what
greater
we're jumping
technical
into.
capacity.
right. That seems
So
reasonable.
so really, nothing's changing. We're just reasserting the same
And it feels like
forgotten knowledge. if you
communicating
will.
with the gods or the saints
Forgotten
and all
knowledge.
this.
It's not even forgotten.
Communicating.
It's just it's just been dissected.
How dare you
and spread out.
communicate with forgotten knowledge? Is that
Well,
what you
I'm
said?
still I'm still human like they were, so I don't know.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. No.
my
I'm
my
just-
starting point is this:
It's
the
it's great.
species is the same species. Something else is off.
Right.
We're not really the problem.
Right.
Something
right.
else is a problem.
And this reminds me, there's a big point made in this book, post-capitalist desire, that capital itself sort of controls, like a puppet, like a marionette, the people who steward capital. In other words, the ego, through your ego, the market, all that shit. The capital itself is like an outside sort of force of just abundance.
So it's
right?
really how to not
It's
be
like
a puppet.
It's a resource, but it turned into capital because it's cancerous unto itself.
So really, the entire argument of our book is to how to not be the puppet, while not appearing to be contrary to the puppeteer. Fair enough.
Right?
Well, that's a good analogy, right? Or metaphor. I think.
Yeah, of like with capital, the relationship with capital, right? That's a weird way of thinking of it, right? That I put forward there, is that it's the puppet master, and you, as owner of the means of production, quote unquote, are basically put into a whole other class of people, and exist in a whole other lifestyle, alien to what we would normally think almost like there is that ownership of capital.
While the means of production ownership
and there's, I think
is
it's a clear
an important part
scale
of it,
There's a clear scale between the two, right?
while
The working class and the owner class, let's call it. The dominant and the subordinate.
there's three classes. First of all, in the model,
What's the third on that?
management.
Yeah, the professionals. Professional class, right?
That is ubiquitous to capitalism. So there's your owner, there's
No,
your
you're correct.
then there's your manager, and then there's your worker. Now the biggest problem for the worker in all of these stories has never been the owner. It's been the manager. That's because the manager straddles the very, very tip of the failed owner.
But you can't say that that's
Mythology.
the root cause of the problems.
No,
the
it's
manager
the
is
pattern
just,
of the problem.
The manager is doing what the owner directs them to do.
It's a pattern.
Correct?
Yeah.
The
it's,
owner is directing them.
it's a pattern, but it alleviates the owner from having to do the physical demands on the people, and it alleviates them from the repercussions
Do you
from
think it
retaliation.
really does?
Until
That's
it
the
fails.
question.
Until it fails. When it fails, you get your revolution.
Okay, no,
Up until
I
that-
get what you're
up
saying
until
in
that
like a general
point-
sense. It's probably always been like that, right?
Up until that point, you get a destabilization period of reform.
Yeah.
Reform leads to the revolution.
So you're putting forward this idea that there's a manager class or a professional class,
The
as we
buffers.
call it, which
It buffers. And
seems like a class,
ironically-
but it's really of the working class. That class is ironically the
Ironically.
working class itself, which is being lorded over by the ownership class.
the
quote
irony
unquote.
the irony of the situation is very much more sad, not sad, depressing. The irony of the situation is the
Sure.
fatter
Hit us with it.
it's the fatter that this buffer space is, the greater the catalyst is for it disappearing.
And again, not
Eh,
holding accountable the owners of capital who are directing things.
I'm against.
Correct.
I'm against. Yeah.
It's
so
a
in the inflationary period, I'm talking about reform.
misdirection, if you will.
Yeah, I'm talking
The
about reform.
classic misdirection.
We get
the
more-
classic political misdirection is to the politician themselves or to the political party themselves and say that's what's wrong. Never mind the owners of fucking capital.
Simpler than that. More institutions.
Do it simpler,
More
man.
laws.
Do
more
it.
institutions. More laws. More institutions to uphold those laws. More institutions. More. This is like a bubbling up of the management portion. Reform. Eventually,
Okay, I
it
see
becomes
that
too big.
that is a shortcut method.
it
It's
got-
simpler.
it has-
seems simpler at the time.
Eventually, it starts to crumble under its
Right.
own weight, and
You're,
you start to
you're suppressing
funnel in-
desire.
and you funnel in a lot of people into the elite stage as well. By being inflated, there's more.
I think that almost never
there's
happens.
a bigger stage, right? More actors. More actors can make their voices heard. More climb to the top. Once there's enough at the top, there's a split. That's our revolution. And subsections of this management goes to one side,
see that?
subsections of the management go to the other side. But the very common thing that they all have is that they're still throwing the entire working class under the fucking bus. And the only difference now is that instead of fighting the
Dude.
forces upwards, they're
Yo.
fighting each other.
Let me tell you something, Jenya, right now, buddy. This book I read is like all fucking mops the floor. Anybody who tries to argue any of this, you're getting your ass mopped on the floor with this structure, which I've outlined by cataloging a fucking book by reading it twice.
But do you know what
this
I described
structure,
though? I described
the
one
same,
I
probably the
descri-
same.
I described one diagram.
Yeah.
Can you guess?
No, I got too carried away
It's the
to
flame,
even remember,
the
but
ego flame. All I did is I talked to the ego flame. I just pictured the two columns, and
there's so much dedicated to reification, recuperation, and of course, this feeling of a cycles of just getting patched over by capital recuperation, right? Multiple authors. It's there. It's fucking there. Like, you can go off into any tangent, I think, and we've got
Everybody's talked about this.
this.
The only thing we're
This
doing
is the core.
The only thing we're
This
doing
has to be the introduction
is
to the
bringing
book.
back an old arc to all of that's been said over and
What's
over
the
again.
old arc?
Buddhism. We're just taking
Well-
we're just taking what not Buddha, not the scripture, but the hyperstition, the myth, the picture it painted,
We're gonna take
which
a
we're trying to paint as well.
quick break here. and
What
of
I'm
course
trying
that's
what I'm
what-
what I'm
that's
trying
we
to
find.
what I'm trying to say
Yes.
is that some things have been said in the past. These things are being some things have been said
We
in
know.
the past. Some things have been said in the
Yes.
past
It
about
has
the,
been said.
about the current affairs. The current affairs have been developing, and without the reference to all of that's been said in the past about it,
But yo,
new reiterations of the same information come up.
Buddhism is counterculture.
Oh, it's
This is also counterculture. It's the same lineage. That's how I see it. It's all the same, right? So we're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, yeah. It all links. It all connects. It flows.
Now, this is just me.
We do have to
babbling.
take a break very soon though, because I have to not
I
piss my pants.
I will take a minute.
Okay.
Hold
that power.
Buddhism is a counterculture that started itself off as a group of weird ascetics, which was an acceptable thing to do at the time, but
Acceptable.
and we're allowed to sort of discuss the main points of whatever is being said to them in an open conversation. That's its origin. So it starts off as an
And
honest
he was
conversation.
the rich prince bastard, living
I
in
think
his
that's
holy temple.
I honestly think that
and
is a
then
mythology
he
that
left
that
his
was,
wife and his kid,
that was a mythology to give
the
character
Gautama Buddha.
to give character to the whatever archetype that was trying to be presented in
Right.
the flow of that conversation.
The whole idea, of, which is unimaginable, of leaving your life and just trying to
It's very
figure out
idealized.
what it's about.
It's
what
very
all about.
idealized because it touches on points.
And I'm giving you 1 minute now.
Okay. It's idealized in the sense that if you read the very first scriptures about Buddhism and that how he left the household, it's idealized to the culture and milieu that he was in.
Where it was in.
He was doing specific things.
They would understand it. So
Yeah.
that's
He
it's
shaved
expedient. It's
he-
expedient. Fine, good.
He shaved off his beard and hair, which was a sign of status in the time.
Right.
So
right. So what's
it's
more
a symbol.
significant? What did he do that was significant? Truly,
The other thing
in his moment.
The other thing is being picked on is the fact that he left his wife and family, but the context was that she had a full house full of servants.
The whole palace.
So this was not like an abandonment situation. It was more about a statement
The
of
kid isn't gonna die.
the familial statement of like even this is not part of the journey. At least not in that capacity.
Yeah.
Not in that capacity. Not in this
Pretty
staged
wild, right?
capacity.
The story, right? So
And
hard.
so
it's
it-
hard to get caught up on these little
So-
details as a listener.
So
a
the
new
story of the
listener
Buddha
to,
is a
to the
myth.
Buddha.
It's the story of the Buddha's thing is a myth
Expedient.
to show
But
how it looks.
myths are powerful and real too. There's like a whole like
Because they're touching on the experiment, they're touching on the experience. Everybody goes through leaving things. Everybody goes through leaving behind things they find important. It's the attitude that has been taken and shown to show how the story progresses to set the template.
focus
It's
on
it's
the
it's an
areas
al-
of concern.
It's an abstract algorithm encoded in a poem, encoded in a myth.
And with that, we'll be right back. before. You're not too bad. Half an hour.
Because you really need to get this out, so I apologize for not being able to let you.
Well, it's all part of it though. It always branches out. It's the fractal. It's the fractal. So I thank you. I proposed a half hour before. That was a long time ago. It's still the half hour. We've been chilling. I love the productivity, right? Just to say, right off the bat, we've been really trying to stitch together the alpha and the omega of this book, which is like, where did that split happen, right? But the great schism.
Where did
Right.
our mind...
Between reification...
When did our mind run away from us?
Right, through reification and externalized memory and all this kind of stuff.
The problem of counting,
Right.
which is at the root, as I would like to call it. The transformation of type to category. Here.
Right. Yes. No. That's
Like there's that information there, yeah. Type to category.
that's and that is the that is the start of civilization, really, which you could call the same as the start of capitalism.
Yeah,
This
it goes
division.
hand in hand. This division transforms the spiritual world from
Right.
From peers to gods.
So what I'd like to see, or for people to see, is that capitalism as a target, quote unquote, is what's been happening since the very fucking beginning of civilization, all this kind of stuff.
A statement
we can
that has been repeated many times.
we
as
can
well.
actually rope it under this label, capitalism.
Sure.
Right? This is the ego, the market. This
Yeah.
this is seeing objects as capital.
It's
right?
literally not a new idea. Like it's been written about numerous times.
Right. So that as the very beginning, we can. So this is like Mark Fisher's, like, why did he call this course post-capitalist desire, right? Right off the bat, that brings the question, what is post-capitalism? What is desire? Right? And then you've been talking about what we've been talking about. So with this book, we're assuming post-capitalist desire is significant, whatever it is. However it's defined, we'll find that throughout the book, right?
Post-capitalism is
This is the pre- and post-tribe hyperstition, right?
I'd like to understand the word post-capitalism as you use it, because on the one hand, this is just a question I have. On the one hand, we have how do we merge the medicine machine with the capitalistic outflow, which means we're not post-capitalism per se, not in the quote unquote
Correct.
understanding.
This is
versus the
very
idea
fine
of
and correct.
post-capitalism that it's being presented in this sense, because I don't think it's the same. We're not even in the realm of thought of post-capitalism.
Okay, so here's my thoughts on this initially, is that what is capitalism? It is through this ego mechanism, through the market, an identification of artifacts under certain objective classes.
Accelerated
Including-
quantification.
When you look at something, it is capital. So being the object of capital means that it itself can be utilized to create more of itself. So it's like a cancerous sort of process built into itself. That's what capital is.
I got the exponent graph in my head for this, and the way I want to phrase it is as exponential quantification. If you start off with the basis of quality
exponential quantification.
And then you have,
Yes.
and it's like a metastable
No,
thing.
you
in
don't
which
need to
if you
any further.
If you agitate it, and it's like, you know, that metastable transformation. If you agitate something, like if you cool water below 0 degrees, but without agitation, it'll stay water.
It is the process of quantification motivated through the ego. In other words, reward punishment mechanism. So it's a mechanistic social engagement.
What I'm trying to say is that as soon as you insert a little bit of it, it exponentially expands. It's like a trend towards
Right. And this is where we need the medicine, as it were. Right.
And so what is sacrificed in the transformation in our exposition would be the quality for quantity. That's what's accelerating in the exponents. The more qualities are transformed, the exponentially more qualities will be transformed, and so on and so forth and so forth. That's the trend anyway.
Yeah. So it seems obviously breakaway. You almost don't have to even
That's even the picture of the breaking away.
convince. You don't have to convince of that.
That's
it
like a
seems.
graph of breaking it away, right? Like obviously there's not going to be a quantifiable way to measure the axes.
Right. So back in the day with the tribe, your oral tradition grandpa had nothing to say about this new like writing formats and like externalized memory and continental messaging.
Another theme of 33 Myths of the System was peers teaching peers instead of elder teaching youngs. Like that shift.
Right. Did the shift even really happen though? Because it should.
We learn.
I think.
How much do you learn from your mom? How much are we learning from each other?
Right.
Like even simple, like we're in it.
So like that kind of gives a neutral regard. To
Or
this.
or infantile or under bootstrapped, like, right? The point of the entire elder experience is to bootstrap the younger experience. Or if you're removing elements of that over and over and over,
Right, that's completely disconnected by now.
that's
Very interesting.
that's the image I have.
So let's try to keep roping back to this
course.
core thing idea, connecting the pre-tribe with the post-tribe. Let's call it like that.
Sure.
Right.
Simplicity.
Yep. And this, I think, is the introduction. So far, it requires no introduction, but let's run through it. Let's stop beating around the bush here. All right, so we've
Not
established.
in agreement.
We've established,
enthusiastically.
and I think this is so philosophically significant that desire has to be acknowledged. That we all have like kind of an intrinsic inner desire, if you will, like something that's beyond the structures of life that pushes you this way and that, right? And that would come. This whole first section of this entire thing we talked about this.
I have a way to reformulate it.
We
for
totally
later.
did. Thank you, and please try to remember.
Yep. Remind me. Desire.
So, I'm kind of giving a book report of this Mark Fisher's Post-Capitalist Desire.
I'm just having a smoke now.
Right? It's a series of like 4 or 5 lectures. And it's just recorded, and it's like students asking questions and stuff. And so I've reformulated that in my own understanding of what is the meaning of what's being conveyed. So I tried to fit together all the ideas and how they work together. And what I got from that was the structure. You have the lighter.
It's not working.
So let me try. Oh, I had one.
Thanks.
I keep letting it go. I'm not going to let it go next time. It's going to come. It's just really bastardous. And then I see it.
Give me my lighter.
And I don't want to see it again. So anyways, you smoke... No. You don't smoke your thing. We must have a lighter here.
Oh, man. Desire. Desire is probably best explained by... what was it? Absorption and dissipation. A discussion related to complex adaptive system. Desire is what is expressed colloquially, what we describe as absorption of energy and dissipation of energy in the complex adaptive system.
Think so?
Yeah, because
You're gonna have to connect that one, buddy.
the structure is as simply as that resonance wakes feed into stacks.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
there's a potential build
You're talking
up,
about self-desire.
and then dissipation.
Pardon.
And I think
Exactly.
And that's
In other words,
that's to connect it to why it's ubiquitous
A very, like
and fundamental, and underneath underlies everything. As
just
well.
looking from the side, picture. Kind of,
Why do
kind
we
of feeling.
do things? Essentially, that's the actual answer.
Right. So
Point-
it
point
all
to
has
that.
to start somewhere. So isn't that interesting?
I just tried to connect what.
This is the base of all. Like, I tried mapping
Thank you.
this book, and this is the base of where it is. It lands at desire being suppressed by ego, right? And that's in our kind of terms.
So you have a bunch of build up and nowhere for it to go.
And now you should have a consciousness of people aware of this thing happening and working together to deal with it, right? To do something about it. So that's
Whereas in the normal course of things, it's just misdirected. Like your anxiousness to do something is misdirected for
it's so
whatever
simple. It's
simple
so
work,
It's so simple.
busy
Like,
work rather.
this doesn't even prescribe what to do when you get together with other people. This is just like, I understand that my ego is dominating myself, and this whole world, this techno jumble world making me do shit, right? You feel separate from it. The alienation. This is all zeitgeist, 100%, right? That just built up against
Yeah.
you.
So yeah, we've appropriated what desire is in this context, and you have an offshoot for Cass. So
Yes, with regard to like the most generic takes of how do things stack and work together. Body without organs. That's Deleuze and Guattari, I believe, and their talk on zero and intensities. Intensities I take as layers, basically cast layering. They call it intensities.
when they talk about intensities, what are they talking about?
Like the structure of society, how people are built up to do things. In these commodified layers. That's how I got. That's how I
I'm
interpret
seeing
it.
a scale. What is a difference in what is the difference in intensity?
Fundamental to
means?
significant.
Okay.
It's cast layering. That's
Okay.
what I got. I think it's just that, but
Sure.
I could be wrong. But that's how I've connected. Like that's
I just never heard of it, so I don't know.
yeah, intensities. Right, and Deleuze and Guattari, they have this concept, desiring production. Desiring dash production. This is what you can take as to be this sort of natural.
It's interesting that they still formulate
Natural production
It's interesting that they formulate activity in terms of capital
through
still.
and through desire. But like that's
Because production is
capital. No,
And
production
is
isn't
capital.
necessarily capital.
No?
No, it wouldn't be in this case.
Okay. Then I
And
misunderstood.
it because it is a weird word to link with desiring dash production, right?
Because I can understand the need for creation.
So this juts well into the self, I think, which could understand such a process as to be done to produce something, to produce a loaf of bread, or
In my head, I'm seeing creation like a creative desire, like that dissipation,
Right.
creative desire, and that creative desire being weaved into a narrative
Of production.
of being recreated,
Of something being created.
Yeah. So the narrative
Right.
being created.
And so certain objects of desire, which are probably self-similar
Mhm.
in all likelihood.
So I
right?
can see all that throughout a model, yeah.
Right. So that's what they call that. Yeah. And that's why I think that should all be there, because it's a big. We're setting up this system, and then we are breaking off from that system. We're showing how it breaks off, right? So we're showing the self and then the ego. And in our model, we try to simplify things by just keeping it to terms like self and ego, which we can all kind of sort of understand.
You know
the
what the analogy?
connotations.
You know what the analogy is? Cancer is yourself. So, cancer is another reinterpretation of your own DNA.
You sound like Agent Smith.
Well, I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to be like
Nihilistic?
family friendly here. I'm just trying to give the picture of the difference between the self and the ego in a different context, where you have
Cool.
where you have your organism, and that organism develops cancer.
Right.
Same DNA, same machinery, working towards a very different goal. And the reason I'm making that comparison is because if you look at the outflow of capital in itself, it's just self-consuming.
It's all
To-
kind of like that.
It's like to transform the entire planet into the landfill picture that I painted earlier
Beautiful.
with self-consumption.
As fast as possible, mind you.
Yeah.
Like
And
slow isn't good
and
enough.
accelerate at the rapidest possible pace.
Right.
So yeah, like that should be the real. It's the same. I remember dysmorphic something syndrome. What was it? We had a syndrome, mimetic dysmorphism syndrome.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
been a while.
it's the same thing. It's this. All of this applies to the same principle. You have the exact same machinery, utilized in different ways. In and of itself, not a problem. Apart from the thing that we've removed, the
In
tendency
context.
of the ways that don't work to die fast enough, which exacerbated a different problem.
Hmm.
Right?
Didn't quite
because
get that, but context is important.
I'm referring back to the delay between activity to its consequence. We've enabled a time increase,
The gap. This is
Between-
through the plateaus of
Whi-
commodification.
which allows
A sort of distance between
which allows the market to
yourself
slot itself in.
and consequences.
Exactly.
Let's call it.
And this is the space in which the market slots in, feeding the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Picture,
Damn.
wise.
So
Keep
we're
going,
at,
keep
we're at
going.
about 15 minutes.
Sorry.
We're at about 15 minutes. Yeah, I'll just blast through it. You know what?
Yeah,
we'll,
yeah.
We'll get this done because we've
Why not?
already talked big time about this desire for self, which is a natural kind of thing. Deleuze Guattari, there's like all this kind of setting up for how desire for self is natural. Then you have desire for ego, which is kind of separate. And then the ego suppresses desire of the self. So that's kind of the thing. This is how it's set up in kind of theory.
So it suppresses,
And-
let's say, the ephemerality of the self appearing in narrative,
It takes the fuck over. Now everything is about ego.
and isolates it.
And so, but what we're supposed to see from this is that this idea, Mark Fisher, subordinated group consciousness was supposed to talk about gender, i.e. feminism, and race as like sub-classes, like class consciousness and all this. We need to take this a step further and go into like ego consciousness or self-consciousness.
Wouldn't these appear at the bottom of the eagle flame diagram?
This is the thing. So
I'm just asking for a yes or no kind of thing, if that relates to that. In the eagle flame diagram, you got egos doing war at the bottom, with reform
Right.
and a revolution at the top, being all kind of unified.
right.
So I'm just saying, like, your sex wars, your race wars,
On
your
the ego
whatever,
side,
it's
it-
just ego fodder.
Churning. It would be churning forever on the ego
Exact-
side.
yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
But you'd have this kind of, we're assuming like kind of steady side, in which, so the desire for self is always there, no matter what. So this is kind of like a really philosophical thing, like, well, what is really the motivation for this, and does it just naturally happen, or are we constructing something in our heads?
It's a side effect of narrative.
Well, the answer to that Fisher sets up very
Oh, sorry.
steadily,
Sorry.
I think, in this, is that yes, there is a basic desire for life itself that just kind of bubbles up from within the being, right? That wants to organize things, that wants things to be good and feel good and all
And
this.
you can formulate it kind of thing.
You can hijack it with this feel good reward punishment mechanism, correct?
That you can formulate it as one thing. So that you can hijack it as one thing, and that is what that makes me feel like the important point is here. You can't formulate it, and therefore, when you get formulations of it, you get examples of hijacking.
I'm pretty sure
some benevolent.
subtext. I heard what you said.
Some benevolent, but most malevolent, aka the charlatan versus
Right.
master. You can't weed out the master
Yeah, and
out
this
of
is
the
like
charlatan.
the navigating of the signals.
That's all I meant to say there.
And, yeah, to put that in there. There's no black and white.
Okay,
There's no black and white.
just trying to relate.
So yeah, the big thing that this book sets up, in my opinion, is that desire is unavoidable, always exists. It gets hijacked by the ego into market. Okay, and then the leap here that's made is about
The
what's
false
called subordinated group consciousness.
When you say that, it's the false promise of satiating the desire through the market, which never actually comes about.
As any yes,
Because the market's foreign.
and it's all based on soundbite only, and
Processing.
through monetary laundering, right?
Yeah.
All the usual suspects, right? So we're leaving open this space for self on the sideband to kind of creep up.
It's
And
sawdust in your
self,
bread.
Self can still happen up into the subordinated group consciousness, right?
It's sawdust in your bread, man.
So this is a consciousness of people, and consciousness has to be built. This is a thing hammered in by Fisher, that consciousness doesn't just exist. It's something that has to be built in, that you understand
Trigger, warning.
about the fact that there is the ego, and it is subordinating the body itself.
Consciousness. Very triggering.
I thought you were gonna pick something deeper than that, man.
No.
We can keep
You're
going.
right. You're right, because we can tackle what ego is. We can tackle all that. But
We
when
can
you
keep
say,
going.
When you can say
This
when
is
you say
the whole
consciousness,
point of it. Boom. Now we're up to
It's
subordinated
harder.
group consciousness. What Fisher wanted to point at was the ideas like class consciousness, like, oh, we're the working class, we're the proletariat, right? Fisher is trying to identify active elements of counterculture, of rebellion, if you will.
Consciousness in this context means access to a representation.
I like
It's not the kind of consciousness
Yes.
that we're trying to.
Yes, Correct.
That's where I'm struggling.
Access to a
That's why I was
representation.
struggling with the word.
This is a map, this is a model, and it has to be built. This is one thing that was very firmly...
I was triggered by the word because it didn't mean anything. So I was, but by the way you're describing
yes.
it, it's an ability to access a representation,
It's,
so you can.
it's an abstract sort of
So
formulation.
you can move it
of
through whatever formal system of idea
consciousness.
of
Right.
rationality
Correct,
that you
yes.
can apply to.
So, and what that
Yeah.
kind of gives you is that any movement, anybody wants to be part of a movement, you have to raise your consciousness to this, right? So it's like kind of an acknowledgement that there's things we don't know that we have to kind of pull into ourselves.
So raised consciousness is actually more like integration
There's, I think that's a component.
of representation.
That's a component.
The
because
integration of that representation.
what I got from raised consciousness was a very careful
And
interaction
allow-
with the environment and what you think of as our labels.
Right.
The labels of your... This is like a
allow
psychedelic...
allow feedback to manipulate the said representation
Right.
as
Yes.
you use the
Right, right.
representation.
So that'd be like a
So
definition
meditation, essentially.
Right.
Feedback. Okay. Yep.
of... Yes.
Same ideals, different wording. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the model that we've developed basically links up with what's been established. And for a sec, we'll take a break.
Hello.
Do-do-do-do-do-do. Well, ladies and gents, we are very much nearing the last bit of a time constraint.
Couple
I'm
of
not even going
minutes.
to put a time limit on this. However, I've been working, let's just say, I've been working on this book report for the last, like, almost a month. Like, and I've been reading this book and just obsessing over it and learning all the concepts and, like, how it all links together. So this book, somehow intuitively I discovered it, I guess, because I thought it would provide an introduction to our work, and it did.
It's a synthesis.
And-
It's a nice synthesis of a lot of disparate people's work.
It's the types of things that Mark Fisher would be working on right now.
All right. So let's keep going with the content. God bless his soul. For whatever reason, he's no longer with us.
And Jenya, if you could just smoke your cigarette,
Keep talking.
I'm gonna keep talking. We don't have overhead cameras. So we got into this idea barely of subordinated group consciousness, which is the idea that well, this involves class a little bit, but also gender and race. And what I thought personally is that this should be taken a bit further into a concept that is even more generic than subordinated group we'll call it subordinated group consciousness, but what we are talking about, yes, the feelings of the zeitgeist of which people have,
I
and
don't see a difference yet.
yeah, like this is a major turning point of the book, if you will, I guess.
So the realizations of the different silo-in divisions, race, gender.
Right. So a lot of pain was taken in the book to, like, talk about the groanings of, like, how divided and things that people get through this identitarian type of reification, all that kind of stuff. So we actually have to take it a step further and move into the ego lording it over the self, if you will. This is how we are presenting it.
AKA what roadblocks the ego presents to the whole process, yeah.
This is how we are presenting it. The ego is sitting on top of the self. Okay, so from there we have accelerationism. That's the next little idea here.
It's part of the pragmatic model, by the way.
So
That description. How the ego covers the reality of things. It's really part of the two entrances. The first entrance.
Yeah.
You gotta philosophically take
It's
that
based
on,
into the
like,
whole thing, yes.
as a faith thing. Yeah, it's cool.
Right.
I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, man. Yep. So this idea of subordinated group consciousness. This is what's been developed from understanding that the our base natural desires have been split into ego, which is kind of, let's say, suppressing the self desires. Right?
Survival sold as consumption.
So there's all kinds of connections. That's the best. This is the
descriptor.
root introduction of the book.
Yeah.
This is right down the line. Then you come into, okay, where do we go from here? What do we do? It's like this whole Marxist idea and, like, communists and all that, like the proletariat. Like you need to have a sort of let's say, to agitate a group of people. That's what it's a technical term. You agitate them. Then what do you do? Right? So you've agitated all of these subordinate groups, all these selves who feel like the ego is dominating them and pestering the shit out of them. Those are the subordinated groups. The dominant group is dominating over them. The accelerationism is like, okay, what's been happening and how do I move the fuck past all of this? And this is where we bring in, like, the Portal Mountain chronology and, like, the plateaus of commodification to, like, explain what's been happening and where we are at, right? This is what the subordinated group needs to focus on and finish history. Basically, we are finishing history. That's what accelerationism.
Not just subordinated group.
We are
That
all
can't-
we are
that
we are
can't
all
track.
subordinated. Every single node, if you will identify with it because we're all under it.
So unless you sell the shit out of the fact that the people that believe there's no class are in a class, you're not gonna get the same effect. The problem being is that you have a specific identifiable group of a force group
And I
that
thought-
will absolutely negate it.
I thought this was negated by the fact that the ego class and the self class are within the single neural unit. To sort that out. It's not about out there.
I don't disagree.
It's only internal.
I don't
so
disagree.
does that fix that?
No, I don't disagree with the premise. What I'm finding trouble with is that. Do you remember my descriptor of Musk? Vacant. There is no Musk.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Of course.
So
I mean,
the issue you're facing.
this is the commodity of Musk. The
issue you're
brand, if you will,
the issue
exists on media.
The issue you're facing with is that these are no longer people specifically, but they're pictures of people.
I don't see that. I don't see where that is exactly an issue. But we could continue. So through accelerationism, I just my whole book report thing. Like, we're down to the last couple minutes here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've been researching this the last few weeks. It's like so awesome. This is the introduction to the book that we're doing. So it says you've got the subordinated group consciousness. You accelerate it, quote unquote. Let's just say that's the next movement. And through what? And this is my take on the book. I believe it splits off in two pieces here. One is history, quote unquote. The other is true history, quote unquote. True history is pointing towards medicine. History is pointing towards reification. And this book just has so many examples of reification and also of medicine, right? So I kind of split it off at this point of accelerate. What are we accelerating? The process of true history. This comes through medicine, right? But the book itself does catalog so much fucked up shit on the reification side. And then it all both comes together to this final page about
Showdown.
is post-capitalism imaginable, and all it is a collection of existing projects, right? So we can one up the shit out of that.
Well,
right?
for
But-
one, we're going to answer the question. There is no such thing as post-capitalism.
right.
That is not a thing. It is a mythological thing, but
Right.
it's in the category
So,
of false mythologies.
Rightly so. Capitalism takes on this kind of like under structure to the culture. We're just waiting for things to be built upon it, right? It takes on this kind of like cold-hearted logical calculation layer to economy.
It has been a medium for far too long for it to not be integrated
Now-
into everything.
We can talk about transition, if you will, and all
And
that
by
kind of stuff.
everything, I'm
And things
talking
do
about
transition.
By everything, I'm talking about our capacity for reification. We can't get to a point of post-categorization. We cannot get in our language. We cannot get past
Right.
to a point of
Yes.
no enumeration of enumeration. The problem of counting is, so to speak, here to stay.
So isn't our project obvious? Isn't it a project that should start from the top where we can understand it and build down into the layers, starting from the temporal tampering and building down into like take people up into this layer and then allow, help them to unfold the next layer. Like we have to start from the top because that's where people are right now.
To find
Do you see what I'm saying?
To realize the tribe in the face of enumeration.
And this to me is that all that education academy stuff. Like Encounter the Guild, that education is part of it. You're going to be hit with this like kind of basic, crazy basic stuff.
Experientially, sure. Yeah. So it's the tribal. It's not identification, obviously. It's the pre-commodified tribe in concert with enumeration. What does that picture look like?
That's like the untainted, if you will.
And
I've asked that, and I think that's great.
and when it comes to commodification, we have to take several plateaus into consideration. Is that
Right.
even if you drop below one, you're still landing in the next.
Right.
You're still landing in the
So
next.
you
before
can't give a simple
all the way
simple
back to
picture.
land.
There's no simple picture of it to give.
It's going to be insane, and the insanity of it is, of course, mitigated by the institution corporation setup to capture the quantified demands and create a systematic distribution of supply based on those inputs in the moment.
We still have a lot to work on, I think.
We're certainly not going to be like the deliverers of any said system, and the reason the reason is very simple. For this there can be no deliverers. There can only be an emergence,
Right.
and
that
is a very hard pill to swallow, if at all possible.
Right.
That beyond, there is no question, in fact, about there's no force in this. It's that inner DNA flow for growth from within.
Yeah.
That is absolutely
There's no project.
fundamentally.
Oh, here now we're doing
internal.
this. Now we're doing that. Doesn't exist. Things appear. Things appear, and rightly so, right when you need them.
So, are we gonna make your life easier? No. Not a chance.
Yep, no, but awesome project, which I love, and we're writing a book. So, like, hey, how cool is that? That's like, and I still didn't even go through, like, well, yeah, I guess, yeah. We did, actually. Right?
I didn't stop you. I
No, we
didn't
did.
really.
There's reification in medicine, and then it just ends up in the question, is post-capitalism imaginable? That's a question.
The answer is there is no such thing. It's not that it's not
Yes and no.
it's not that it's not imaginable. Yeah, it is imaginable.
Well, obviously,
It
look
has
what's been
it will not
created.
it will not have any reification. Like that is not a hyperstition. It is a superstition. Post capitalism is a superstition.
Based on what it's titled. Okay, so create a new title. Hyperstitiously accurate.
Hyperstitially accurate is not going to be a scenario in which capitalism does not exist. It won't.
That's
It will
fundamentally-
definitely not be that.
That's fundamentally correct, but I would almost put forward a position to support the term post-capitalist.
Can capitalism
desire?
Can capitalism take a far more, and I mean really far more, subservient role and be useful? Yes.
Dude, now you're out there.
But
I
it
can't
will
even
not-
agree to that.
Well,
No, I'm just kidding.
it's in the trade guild. It's
Well,
built into
we
it.
have to think about it rationally, logically. There always is the outside. Therefore, there always is capitalism. Period.
If there is trade, capitalism will
Period.
arise. Yeah.
Correct. So the question then is,
Which is,
can we build sustained,
and trade. Remember, trade
sustained
is,
regions
is,
of guild?
Trade is the medium of communication between enemies. It's not a
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
our
a means of
thinking.
communication
That's the
between
thinking.
allies.
No,
So
allies don't
that
trade.
needs to be understood.
Family doesn't
understood.
trade one thing for another amongst themselves.
And when they do, are they family? Well, they don't behave as one.
Right, right, and it's this model of bubbling up bubbles.
Of transactions. Yay. Servitude and business in the family unit.
Right.
So fun.
Right. So this is almost, it seems usually unimaginable for most people to
Unless you're royalty
think
or
about.
something.
Well, yeah. Then it's like, oh, who cares?
All right.
This territory for that. We're both alive, so it's good.
For now.
Right. Yeah. The other cultures. Right. What a world we live in.
Yep.
What a world we do.
Anyway, we gotta
And,
go.
Yep. With that, I think it's been great. A little very casual today.
Is there more to the spiel, or
Casualistic.
is there more to the spiel to wrap up, or is there? I'm
mm.
asking for next meeting,
No, like.
or did we cover it?
So I need to write an introduction to our book utilizing this, basically.
And with the knowledge in
answer
mind
is-
about the end of the book too.
Yes, we've basically captured everything.
We're gonna land in isomorphism and the passive, and the active form, and that is going to be what Sentient Machine is about.
Right. Yeah, a high-tech
High five.
description for a high-tech concept. And with that will be it.
Sentient Machines.